Welcome to Council Chambers. It is November 5th today. I'm trying to figure out what day it is. And we're going to our second evening of corporate planning. Members of Council, we had a presentation from administration yesterday. We had some questions asked for clarity answers and some questions that were not answered that was provided for us through an email earlier this afternoon, and also there's a hard copy on your desk. Before we start into deliberations and conversation and maybe debate, does Council have any questions regarding clarity of the stuff that we received today or anything that was presented again yesterday? Members of Council? Council Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you to administration for providing us with this material. I have a question in regards to the information received from the question I asked yesterday regarding the golf course. We've received the current financial report for the golf course. Two questions for administration. One, I'm still looking for the first half of my question in regards to the budget increase, if we can get a little bit of a synopsis as to the reasoning behind the budget increase and what that's going to do for the golf course and what the expected results of that are. And then secondly, in respect to this year's current budget outlook, I see that we are only sitting at approximately $1.1 million of a budget of $1.5 million in administrative fees, which is green fees and pro shop sales. Being that the season is over, I know we have a little bit of ability to capture some revenue over the following 2 months. I'm just wondering if administration has some type of an outlook as to what the potential revenue over the next 2 months may be, so we get a little bit of a picture as to where the golf course might end for the year.
Okay. Go ahead.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Laurie. So for the October 31st to December 31st, you're right, the season's over. We are getting rid of items from the pro shop, so there are some returns there. My understanding from Jeff today is they returned about $23,000 to $25,000 worth of items this morning, actually. So that receivable is yet to come to the town of Stony Plain. They have a projected $50,000 to $52,000 worth of rentals between now, so Christmas parties, those types of events happening. Sorry, that includes the $25,000. So about another $25,000 to $30,000 worth of rentals happening at the facility between now and the end of the year, which would be Christmas parties, banquets, birthday parties, those types of things. Also, there are rentals related to the simulator, which has a food component to it. No estimations really on what that might look like because it's dependent on booking. So probably some marginal increase there between now and the end of the year. And then again, the first 2 quarters of 2020 will also see some impacts and revenues from that perspective. Christmas sale is also happening this year, so more merchandise will leave the shop likely. There's about $25,000 worth of hard goods in the shop right now, which is balls, gloves, a few bags, stuff that typically will disappear at Christmas time. So that's where that sits. I did also ask Jeff with respect to the rain and the lost revenue that we had at the golf course related to that. I'm just trying to pull up the spreadsheet I sent the General Manager of Corp Services. So if you give me 2 seconds, I pulled up the wrong one just a few minutes ago. That's where it is. Jeff provided me some numbers this afternoon. So the months of April and May, we, as you are aware, we completed and changed the greens, replaced all the greens because they woke up dead this year. So the revenue that we lost for half a month of April and May equals about $150,000. We had about 146 millimeters of rain in the month of June. So that equates to about 20 days of lost revenue. That estimation is about $100,000 that we did not bring to the course. The month of July, a little less rain. I think there's about 122 millimeters if my memory serves, about $75,000. And then we're looking at about a $50,000 loss with respect to August because the wet was less in that month. Total loss over that month period or those month periods is $425,000. So if you add that to what we basically have brought into from a revenue perspective, we weren't that far off actually hitting our margins. So the weather certainly has impacted, and as I stated last night, part of our work between now and the start of next season is to come up with some strategy to ensure that when we have wet weather, it's not impacting our bottom line, because both myself and Mr. Cuthbertson are not happy sitting in front of you at the end of a season and telling you about a loss at that facility. That's not our desire. That's not how we prepare our budgets, and that's something that we have to do a better job at in terms of making sure that there's some buffer there when it comes to the inclement weather, because that certainly has an impact on our ability to provide revenues. So that'll be some work that we're preparing to do between now and the start of next season. Whether that's more tournaments, which will impact our day-to-day play from a member perspective, but at some point we have to find some balance point between secured revenues and definite revenues versus do we continue to allow our membership to have free reign of the golf course. So we're still trying to find that balance, and we certainly will. The other impact too is the food and beverage, not having done it for a while. Certainly there was some learning that had to occur at the facility for the first few months. Towards the end of the season, I know they perfected it because the staff loads were quite bare and minimum at the golf course. Some days we didn't know if we should prepare for 100 people or 10 people. And I think they erred on the side of caution, and they planned for 10 people. And if 100 people showed up, they just dealt with it. As opposed to the start of the season, we were looking for 100 people. We were overstaffed for 10 people. So those types of things have started to become quite aware and apparent to the food and beverage staff. So some unfortunate things that happened to us related to weather. We had to replace all of our greens. If the extra revenue came in, we certainly would be looking at a better position at the golf course this year. I'm certainly not sitting in front of you providing excuses. I'm just providing you exactly what happened this year in an oversight or an overview of what happened at the golf course in 2019. And we're working towards trying to soften that so we're not sitting back here in 2020 with the same message for you.
Follow-up, Your Worship?
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. You mentioned a couple numbers here, and so just want to make sure that I've got them right. You said there's about $25,000 in merchandise returns for restocking, about $25,000 predicted somewhere in rental, and another $25,000 in sales. And then you're talking about a potential of about $425,000 in lost revenue from unplayable days, if you want to call it that. Of those days, of those rain days, two questions around that. So how many days was the golf course actually closed so that nobody was able to play? And then, being that we can't predict a perfect season, how many days do we budget within the season that we anticipate rain days? And I guess the difference between how many days we budget and how many days we actually experienced.
I would have to go back and look at the numbers for you and provide more information for you. I can tell you that on an average year operating season, usually 15 to 20 days is probably typical for rain perspectives. Having been there personally, not necessarily golfing, but been at the course when the rains came, they were so steady and hard and volume, you couldn't even go back out and play after the rain stopped. So we fully closed the course on a lot of those days. And there was more days than not with respect to the course was too wet. We couldn't put carts out. We couldn't put people out there standing water on the greens and on the tee boxes. So the amount of volume that came when it did rain was the concern. It's not how much, it was how much that rained on the particular days. I would have to go back and calculate how many days and talk with Jeff with respect to how many days were we physically closed related to rain, as opposed to it rained in the morning and we opened up in the afternoon. So we can provide you with those numbers via email.
Yeah, thank you. It would be interesting to see, because if I remember right, when we received our Q3 report, I believe it stated the course was actually only closed for 2 days based on rain, and that the drainage improvements had significantly reduced the amount of days closed, and that we had seen some success there. So definitely I would like to see that. And then when you talk about the potential lost revenue days, so those are total days, but does that include taking away then the 15 to 20 days that were budgeted to be rain days?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, correct. When I spoke with Jeff, typically we would include those as days that we would typically see in a typical year not receiving revenue or marginal revenue. So when we say 10 rain days, it's not necessarily a complete washout, but it certainly impacts what we would expect on a good day. We did have days where we were bringing in substantial revenue on when the rain was not there and the sun was out. There were certainly days where we were bringing substantial revenue and higher than expected because the course was full. So the course did prove that on days that the course could be open from start to finish, we brought in the revenue projections and even higher than we expected. But the weather certainly played a role in some of the decline.
Thank you. And so then the first part of my question I'm still missing is there's a significant ask for a budget increase of approximately $242,000. Can you again put into context as to what that budget increase is specifically for?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, that would be related to food and beverage. So the costs related to providing food and beverage at the golf course. Our numbers in 2019 probably were not as high or as known as they are in 2020.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, and before I move on to Deputy Mayor, I just have the same question then regarding the increase in maintenance from what is budgeted for $600,000 to year to date from January to October is $765. Was that extra due to the replacement of the greens, or is that what's that due to?
Yeah, that's correct, Your Worship. So the green project and the work related to that would take up the majority of that number.
Okay, then I have a question regarding the food and service beverage, because the expense was $297,000, and the way it's trending, we're going to be double what we projected.
So again,
What's in that expense? Because if it's all salary, we're in trouble.
Your Worship, that's not all salary. That combination of salary plus we had to purchase some equipment in the kitchen, plus it would be the operational requirements of food and beverage supplies.
Okay, Deputy Mayor?
And I look forward to hearing a little bit more about our golf course. But when I look at what you presented us today, which is the attachment number 2 from the golf course, and I'm going to use real simple numbers rather than having to get specific with it. I see 2 years of actual numbers, 1.1 million, 1.1 million, which is revenue that's generated out of this golf course. And yet when I move to 2020, 2021, and 2022, I see an increase of $500,000 in 2020. So I'm just going to take that out real quick because that seems to be a consistent number, that 1.1. And if I move down to the bottom of the page, I see a $500,358,000 deficit again. I have a great concern with what's been going on at the golf course. When I look at this, I see projected numbers that look to be good, but in business for me, when I see 2 years of predictability numbers, and yet I see numbers increasing, that concerns me a lot. So I would like to see this with an actual number on it so that we could reduce that to something that is common today, which is $1 million that we're generating revenue, and get us to at least a zero balance. Because projecting numbers out for 2020 and an increase of $500,000, if you're able to do that using a balanced budget with off of realistic numbers, it would dig us out of some of the holes that we've had over the last few years in this. So I'm just hoping that administration and yourself can work together to redo this budget so that it's more realistic along the ways with numbers we actually know today. Is that something that you can work on to provide to us?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Paleschko, certainly if that's the will of council, we can go back and look at these numbers again if that's the will of council.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm curious about the catering item on this attachment too. It says in 2020, $120,000 is our revenue and $120,000 is our expense. So that's just an in and out budget line. But since catering has not been part of this budget for the last couple of years, I'm wondering, are you changing the scope of the catering?
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett, that 120 for catering is, as we mentioned last evening, the relationship between Heritage Park and the food services at the golf course in terms of, is that a viable expansion of the business model for the food and beverage services? So instead of just being a summer operation, can we take the food and beverage services at the golf course, expand it over to Heritage Park and offer catering services at Heritage Park? So that 120 would represent that exercise.
So that's the plan?
We've tried it. We've done a few this year. We would like to continue exploring that because we do see that as an opportunity for a higher level of service at Heritage Park. And we also see that as an opportunity as a different revenue stream from this food and beverage service at the golf course.
Ms. Mayor, the reason I'm questioning this is because when we built Heritage Park, it was a philosophy of ours to take that service and give it to some of our local businesses. And so I'm wondering if you have considered the impact that will have on some of our local catering businesses. We don't want to be taking money out of our local businesses' pockets.
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett, certainly that's a consideration that we do have, and it's not going to be a mandatory, you rent our facility, you have to use our catering services. Certainly would be a service that we would offer. It wouldn't be, you have to use this service we're not at the point where we would start to restrict people from only using in-house catering services. I don't think that's the will of this particular endeavor.
Okay.
Your worship, if I may, just I think the General Manager of Corporate Services can add a few numbers to the mix, going back to Deputy Mayor's question from a few minutes ago.
Your worship and council, we were just pulling up some of the golf course revenue numbers to give you some context, because we know that it's been difficult years for the golf course the past couple. So I'm going to rattle off some numbers. Hopefully you can follow along, and I'm just going to round like Deputy Mayor did as well. So 2017 golf course revenue was 1.3 million. 2016 was 1.5 million. 2015 was 1.75 million. 2014 was 1.6 million, 2013, 1.5 million. So there has been better years in the past for sure for golf course on the revenue side.
And your worship, if I may, just a quick general comment again, and I know council is aware of this in either acutely or in a roundabout way, but we did have the challenges with our golf greens, and that did affect, the people that wanted to play out there. General Manager mentioned some weather this year, probably a little more than in the past, but weather is a factor every year, give or take a little bit. And the third thing too, golf and playing golf is an expensive sport to a certain degree, and it's not atypical in a tougher times or budget or economic times. It's it's not. It might be something that gets removed from people's own personal budgets when times get a little bit tougher. So I think that's reflected too. But I think we just wanted to indicate, historically the revenue numbers are in and around that area. It's only been the last 3 years, I believe, that we've seen them drop to where they are the last 3 years. So is that a trend at that level? That's what we're looking forward to figuring out next year.
Okay, and before I move on to the next question, I just want to add on to Councillor Bennett's question regarding the catering of 120 in revenue and 120 in expenses. Can you explain to me, if that's something that we want to try as a revenue stream, then if it washes in and out, then why try it at all? Because all we're doing is just creating work for zero revenue stream. So you cannot do that. And will that save on our operations from the food and beverage side? Because it has gone up considerably since we took it over.
Your worship, thank you for the question. We're estimating about a 30% margin on expenses versus revenue, so we're not anticipating an in and out on that. We agree with you. If it was an in and out situation, we wouldn't be interested in doing it. It's just a lot of work for no return. So the number reflected here likely should be closer to 80,000 in terms of the expense versus 120. So it's not a in and out. It would be less spent, more brought in.
Okay.
It's buffet, it's catering. I think as a business owner, you know yourself that when you're at our facility and you're just providing a buffet meal, the profit is there certainly for that type of catering services versus a plated catering service or a restaurant plated service. So that's certainly where staff are thinking in terms of a 30% margin. Could be higher than that, but 30% is very conservative.
Okay, so then why doesn't the expensive show that?
I'm not sure, Your Worship. So I do have another spreadsheet that shows the 80,000. So that's certainly not what the manager at the golf course anticipated as the expenses was 120 to 120. I had the same question this afternoon.
So if we have some clarification on that, please. Councilor Matties?
Your Worship, to administration with regards to the golf course, I would really like to see a presentation from the golf course with regards to understanding some of the realities that we're dealing with today. So we know that we've had some adverse weather, but we also have some trends that are around us. We have economic issues around us as well. And looking at a viable model moving forward, I don't feel that I have enough information this evening, and I would really like to see a case being presented to us as to how this will work moving forward, because there's concerns, and I mean, we have to go back to our citizens and explain this. So if we can, at some point in time, when you're prepared to do so, provide us with just basically, your projections, but also some of the details around it that really helps us to understand how we think we can make this go.
Okay. Thank you, comment. Councillor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. Follow up to the General Manager of Corporate Services in regards to some of the numbers that were projected. I spent a significant amount of time going back through our audited financial statements and looking at some of the numbers that we've seen on the golf course in the last while. The reality that I found, our financial statements are posted from 2013 to today's, which was 2018, and then as well as the information we received, is that in those 7 years, we have only actually exceeded our budget projection once, and our current budget projection once. So I'm just going to run through some numbers here to paint the picture and see if we can get a little bit better understanding. So in 2013, the budget, and this is just for green fees and pro shop, this does not account for anything else. The budget for fees was $1.632 million. The actual was $1.465, for a difference of $166,466 in the negative, or 10% below projection. In 2014, the budget was $1.675 million. The actual realized was $1.487 million, a difference of $94,519 in the red, or 6% miss. In 2015 was our best year at $1.636 million budgeted, with an actual of $1.664 million realized, a difference in the positive of $28,135, or 2% growth. However, from there is where we turn around. Our budget in 2016 was $1.58 million. The actual was $1.44. We missed by $140,952, or 9%. 2017, our budget was $1.73 million. Our actual was $1.2 million, a difference of $526,581, or 30%. Our budget was in 2018 was $1.543 million. Our actual was $1.156, a difference of $387,409 in the negative, or 25%. Our budget in 2019, as we heard, was set at $1.532 million, and our actual received to date is $1.1 million for a difference of $430,817, or 28%. And given that, we are anticipated to see approximately $75,000 more revenue from what I've heard from the general manager, but that still brings us to an approximate miss of $350,000. So I'm left very perplexed and very confused as to why we continue to see such a significant revenue projection for fees when it comes to the green fees and the pro shop sales, when our historic numbers consistently show us missing those, and over the last 3 years show us missing those by a significant margin.
So how are we using the numbers of the budget? Because I have a similar question. If we're looking at new realities, the economic climate is down, golfing is a sport that requires time and money, and if people do not have the money, they may have the time, but they will not go golfing. So if we continue to project $1.5 million in administrative fees for green fees, etc., how does the golf course plan to raise those fees if last few years we're only averaging 1.1 million?
That's a fair question, Your Worship. That's a fair question. Excuse me, given the climate that we're currently having in the last 2 to 3 years, that certainly is impacting our ability, and perhaps our optimism with respect to the revenues that are possible at that facility are clouding our judgment with respect to our projections. So certainly with Councillor Palechko's suggestion of looking back at those numbers and providing a different view is certainly something that we're prepared to go back and do.
Okay. Councillor Bennett?
Listening to this discussion tonight, I guess my question is, when do we talk about whether or not the municipality owning a golf course is the right way to go? Do we do that at our strat plan, or is that something, I mean, I know we're not going to discuss that tonight and debate that, but with some of the numbers that, and some of the questions that have been asked tonight, it's pretty clear that some of our councillors are worried about the deficit that we're having there. And so when will that discussion happen? Should it happen? And at what point will it happen?
Your Worship, if I may comment to that, and I would add that certainly administration has some pretty significant concerns about the cost and the operations of the golf course. And typically, we will do our best to aim for that break even. But as we've, I mean, even in the last 15-minute conversation, you've heard some of the challenges, the difficulties that are faced in operating a golf course. Is that a discussion? Is that a conversation? Is that something that council wishes to explore? Well, obviously, if that's the will of council, that would be the way we would go. General advice on that topic, as it relates to the specific, our budget right now, as it relates to the specific budget, it comes in at a basic break even, I believe. So essentially, there's, it's not a direct effect at this point in time on the rest of the budget. But that's not to say it isn't an impact and an effect on the budget, clearly that it is. So, should council wish to have that discussion or see that move forward, I know that our general manager was planning the service review stuff out there. I'm not sure the exact timing, but I would expect it'll take place through the first quarter, and that's the time that's easiest it's when the golf course isn't in full operation, so I'd be expecting that at some point. Again, council has that opportunity at the strategic planning to have a bit of a conversation there. But, Your Worship, and to the rest of council, it is a discussion that probably should be had. Again, you've heard me a few times say, sometimes these conversations come up every 5 years, every 10 years, and, regardless of where you're at, that you should be reviewing these sorts of things. And, if that's, the understanding of council, I think that'd be a welcomed conversation.
Okay, thank you. And it's good question, good comments, Councillor Bennett. And I think I share the same concerns of yourself and many of the members and council is, I think we as a council need to take a good look at this. I think the last time that the golf course was looked at in terms of ownership from the municipality or not, but early 90s?
1992, Your Worship, because one of our staff just checked when the referendum was. I believe it was
Yes,
92.
early 90s with the referendum, and that passed to keep the golf course. So it might be time again for us as this current council to revisit. So maybe after the corporate plan is done, we can accept the motion, or we can plan it into our strategic planning, and it would have that more in-depth conversation, and then from there, direct administration to provide a more updated financial analysis and the financial feasibility of us continuing owning a golf course. Councillor Meyer?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just back to the golf course, just as I try to evaluate the food services, as that was one of the changes we made this last year. From what I'm sort of reading here, we exceeded our projected budget for revenue from the food services, and we can expect it to go up a little bit more in the last bit of the year. But obviously down in the expenses side, I did hear the general manager mention some kind of purchase that needed to be made for the food services. I'm just curious if that's what sort of ballooned that expenses number up.
Excuse me, Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer. It would be a combination of wages plus the additional purchases of equipment required for the kitchen. So it's a combination of both. As I stated earlier, understanding the functionality of the restaurant services in terms of are 100 people showing up or 10 people. Start of the year, they staff for 100 people. End of the year, we staff for 10 people. We might have got 100 or 200 people in the restaurant, but we still only had staff for 10 people. So we adjusted as we understood what the flow of the restaurant was, and we adjusted as the course and the weather dictated. So on a rainy day, there was not staff at the golf course upstairs. There was minimal staff. On a pleasant day, we would have had more staff at the golf course, and the revenues would suggest that was the right call.
And so, sorry if I could just follow up. So the 513,657 under food services expenses, that's the salaries that you're talking about that were unexpected, and this item that needed to be purchased, correct?
Correct.
What was that item? I'm just trying to, I mean, I can quickly kind of ballpark in my head what.
Sure. Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer, so if I can recall, at the start of the season, some of the equipment that had to be purchased over there when the previous provider left, so he would have left with his cooking appliances, cooking equipment, so not all of it was owned by the Stony Plain Golf Course. We would have had to replace a deep fryer, had to go into that, I'll call it a convection oven, or where you put nachos and those types of things under to melt the cheese. So something like, I'm not sure what that's called. And then an additional oven. So those are the three large pieces of equipment, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Meyer, the other costs that would be in there are the actual raw material, like the food costs. So the vegetables and French fries and that type of thing would also be in that expenditure line.
Thank you. Councillor Lloyd, please.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate the work that is being done to provide us information on the golf course. It has been a bone of contention for many people over the last 4 years, 5 years, but I am reminded of the fact that at one time it was a very profitable entity within the town. It was before my time, but I believe that the revenues that they made went to general revenues for the town, did not stay with the golf course itself. That's hindsight. Maybe if they did have those revenues, that would be their reserves to dig them out of any potential problems or the problems that came about. I know for a fact that we did have the last 2, if not 3 years, some very adverse conditions We did have some very serious greens issues. Talking with golfers, they stopped coming to our golf course simply because those greens were that bad. They chose to golf elsewhere, so that did hurt us. And of course, the weather is just unbelievable. So I think when we are talking this out, I want to keep those things in forefront in my mind and the fellow councillors, but I also am really encouraging our general manager to have a very concise breakdown of the golf course and our projections so that we can go ahead with the best information possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Loy. Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Don't want to continue to beat a dead horse dead, but really, I think what this boils down to, when we look at what's in our corporate budget for the golf course, this budget does have an effect on what affects the bottom line. And using numbers that aren't realistic for me is not something that works for me when I'm looking to move things forward. So for me, I think what we really need to see is something that is a true telltale story of what it is. We know what the revenues are for the last few years. We know the economy is in a downturn. So using some realistic numbers, cutting back on certain areas, I think you could get this to the point where it truly was a break even, which I think would be a lot better than losing $500,000 and $600,000 a year, which I can appreciate hearing you tell me you don't like to sit here in front of us, nor do we like to sit here and have to tell you that we would like to see that at a $0. I think that's a very common thing, and you've heard that very well tonight. So for me, we really need to see this administration, this brought forward with actual numbers so we can see where the cuts are. And we understand that taking it over and running it as a town facility will require some money put back in to see some revenue as well. So having seen both aspects of that would help me with the corporate decision that we have in front of us tonight.
Okay, and Council Deputy Mayor Fletchko, I think you made a good comment there that I understand budgeting, you just make the numbers work out. And I think that's what it looks like here, is the revenue projections for 2020, 2021, and 2022 are just inflated based on the fact that we need to offset the expenses that we have. And on budget, it doesn't affect our corporate plan because it zeroes out. But in reality, when the year end comes and there's a $200,000 deficit or a $300,000 deficit, it does affect any surpluses that we have because we have to find money to cover that deficit. Is there any point of council making a motion to bring down the expenses? We don't know where they can be cut because we're not in the golf course business, but we definitely feel that that's the expenses are over what the actual revenues can be. If council makes a motion to reduce the golf course expenses, for example, by $250,000, we'll leave that up to the general manager and the manager over at the golf course to figure out where the cuts need to be to bring that into line with $250,000.
Yeah, Your Worship, certainly if that was the direction of council, we would go back and, realign, adjust the revenues down, adjust the expenditures down, and do everything we could to stay within that expenditure limit.
Thank you. Councilor Matthews.
Your Worship, due to administration, I really would like to see a presentation from the golf course, from you as well, with regards to the specific projections that you feel would be accurate based on what we've seen over the last few years, and the expenses that go with it, and basically tell us what are you thinking of doing differently moving forward that is going to change the revenue outlook or the expenditure outlook, we need some recommendations before we would just make a blanket cut. So I would like to have a full, good presentation from the golf course.
Well,
Yes,
I
we
think,
need to know.
I think that's a good comment, Council Matties, but I can tell you right now, based on the numbers that they provided, they're just gonna make a presentation that matches those numbers. Right? I can go up there and I can sit on the other side and say, you know what, I think we have a new greens, we're gonna promote harder, and we have new food service night, and we believe that's gonna increase there, and therefore it's getting more revenue. I can make that presentation myself. So I think we need, as a council, is to look at the actual numbers and talk about the ability or the governance side of owning a golf course, yes or no. And that's more in-depth conversation during the council strat planning, so that we can follow those steps, move forward. It's a strat plan issue. Because here, I can have anybody from finance tell you, this is how it works because this is what we predict. You just ask the question of what they predict, and this is what they're presenting us. They think they can generate $1.5 million in revenue. We don't think so, but they just told us that they think they can.
The reality that they experienced was, as we have as a town, we have experienced 2 years of very significant rains. We have experienced an economic downturn, as was discussed. And I feel like just to decide on a number as the cut does not solve the issue that we're dealing with here. We need to know from their perspective what they feel that they can do in terms of cuts, in terms of what we can do that would be relevant for revenues moving forward. And from that point, then make a decision. And if that's at planning in January, that's fine. But
Yeah, and that's fine. And then if a motion does come forward to make those cuts, you can speak for or against that.
Okay.
That's where that's going to be debated.
okay.
Okay. Any other changes, questions, clarity, and understanding of the paperwork that was provided for us this afternoon, and also the presentation from last night? Okay, seeing none, we'll go through the corporate plan again. I'm sure council has had opportunity to read it over the last couple of weeks and looked at it and have questions that they may want to ask for direction or maybe try to bend the ears of council. And if you want to make any changes, you can start by making maybe one sentence comment and then make a motion. And then from there, I'll accept the motion for debate and then so forth, and then we'll go from there. Okay, with that, I'm going to be very clear. Please reference the printed copy. Yes. Okay, we received this printed copy 2 weeks before, a week and a half before the online edition went. And so that all council can be on the same page at the same time. As well, if you want to reference, you can also reference the corporate plan that they gave us. Again, it's a little harder to reference, but everything that's in this corporate plan that was presented by administration is in our corporate plan that was given to us in handout. It's just a little bit more expanded on this copy here. Okay, and also you can also refer to things that we received tonight as well. Councilor Loy, you had your hand up. You have a question?
Just a quick question to make sure I'm on the same page, pardon the pun. Corporate Plan 2020 to 2022, which is the numbers on it.
Yes.
That's the one. So
Yes, so that we can all follow along and try to follow along the conversation and participate in the debate and deliberation of this.
Okay, no, I have no problem. Thank you.
All right, round one. Who wants to start it off? Councilor Bennett, go ahead.
I wonder if I should slide into this, or I have a couple questions before I go into another point. So I guess before you were asking about questions, I probably should have asked it then. In going through this, looking at the snow site in our corporate plan,
Page number.
I have no idea what page it is. Just talking about the things that have been put on to the next few years. And we've been talking about a snow site for at least 5 years. And now we have it budgeted in 2024. I'm wondering if administration can give me an assurance that what we're doing now is not causing environmental damage, and that this snow site really can be put off for 4 more years.
Okay, members of council, that page number is page 62 on the fiscal plan, long-term capital planning, and that is under item number 2024. It's the very bottom. It's a snow storage site.
Thank you.
Your worship, through you to Councillor Bennett. So on page 39, there is a snow storage site concept plan, which is proposed for 2020 for $35,000. So the questions raised by council are very legitimate and very timely. And so the plan would be to in 2020 to understand our options, understand what the environmental impacts might be at the snow storage site, and then come forth with a better idea of the costs and a long-term plan that the town would consider based on some more facts and rigor. So rather than I guess it's hard to understand the actual costs. So the numbers you see in the future here and in the future years are really a best guess at this time. So we wanted to get more rigor in the process next year and then adjust the plan accordingly in the future.
Okay, Mr. Mayor.
So with that, then when do we expect a report on the snow site concept plan?
It's in
Which quarter?
2020.
Your worship, I can't answer that at this moment.
Quarter.
That would be to determined. Obviously, we would like to do it before the next corporate plan gets produced, which we would try to do before June of next year. So information by Q2 would enable us to do better capital planning. So that would be our desire.
So desires for Q2?
Correct.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Councilor Bennett.
Follow up, please. This really confuses me in that it was at least 5 years ago in one of the first strategic planning sessions we had, Mr. Mayor, if you remember, it was brought forward as a priority from our administration, from the, and I believe it was Ms. Portier, who was our Planning and Infrastructure General Manager at that time. And it was a priority then. So what I'm confused about is, didn't we gather information at that point? If it was a priority of administration then, I would think that we would have some numbers and some idea of what this is going to take.
Okay, I think the idea is that they do this as a site concept plan. So where's the site? Is it going to be the North Industrial Park that we've been talking about for the last little while?
Your worship, yes, that is correct. That is the single site that we have at this time.
Okay.
Then I would suggest that, Mr. Mayor, that, that I would expect to see a report in Q2 and not just a hope that we can get it done by Q2.
It is a concept plan, so I do hope so too, because it is very important to us. I remember that strategic planning, we were talking about our snow sites. The snow sites to the east of us where we normally dump the snow from, where is that? Graybar, the fairways, etc. were dumped on private lands, which the developer was trying to dry out so that we're no longer to leave snow there. Same with our southern parts of our community. We're no longer allowed to dump snow there as well. And even behind the arena where the fields are, where we were looking at for the recreation center, was flooding the development to the west. So the only site that we have left is the site in the North Business Park. And we also talked about a snow melter. melting the snow and into the sewer system sanitary. Council Palechico, any thoughts about regarding the Alberta Capital Region wastewater, regarding if a municipality does that?
I think the environmental impact would be something that we would need to talk drastically about with what goes through the wastewater treatment plant is all treatable stuff. And today, I'm not so sure that the amount of salt that you're pouring down there, I know the City of Toronto tried that several years ago. In fact, I know a number of companies out there that bought what you're talking about, big machines to melt it. They put in the sewer, and they quickly found that the deterioration that was going on within their sewer system was far more costly than it was to put the salt on a piece of land and let it dry out over time. So that's a good question, and I think that would be one that the Wastewater Commission would have a lot of fun with trying to figure that total aspect out as to whether that should be a good idea or not a good idea.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll look forward to that report coming back in Q2. Councilor Bennett, anything else?
Well, I do, Mr. Mayor, but I'm sure other people do too, so let's spread this out.
All right, round one, going into player two. Who's player two? Okay, Councilor Matties, go ahead.
May I make a motion?
You can, go ahead.
Your worship, I would like to make a motion, and it's with regards to on page, page 12. Sorry, I referenced everything online. So page 12, with regards to the Community Recreation Center construction phase 1. Sorry, basically phase 1 of the detailed design, so that would be on page 11. I would like to make a motion that we postpone phase 1 to 2021 and also work to advocate for and obtain funding from our regional partners in government. The rationale behind this is that, first of all, we have a new economic reality. The Alberta government cutbacks to future grants, as well as regional partners, are being impacted. And when we set this up originally, or planned for this originally, we understood that this was on the premise of a regional recreation center with support and funding from regional partners and the Alberta government. What I feel right now is that we have lost our foundation of what we were originally talking about just at this point, and that if we took 1 year, that it would allow some of the issues that we're dealing with right now to be just addressed, and hopefully also some time to further advocate with our partners to work together with this initiative. The other rationale behind it is that we have other priorities right now with regards to the transit start. It is very important that we align with the Regional Transit Service Commission through 2021, so that starting our transit. Secondly, we have incurred storm issues this year that have impacted us significantly. A library in downtown that are being completed, 779 completion, cemetery. There's just lots of great things going on, and I believe that if we continue to just demonstrate the advancements that we're making, that we will be ready 1 year from now.
Okay, so Councilor Matties, I don't know why you're making that motion, because on the corporate plan, it is set for 2021.
No, it's 2020 for the design and tender.
Page 12?
No, page 11.
Okay, you referred to page 12.
And then I said page 11.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's page 11, and the motion is that we move that 1 year from 2020 to 2021.
So you want to move page 12, the design and tender phase?
Yeah, and then, of course, the rest of it would continue to move forward from 2021 to 2022.
Can we have the motion made and have a recording secretary place it up on the screen? Once that's up on the screen, we all can individually read it. And then I think the course of action then, Mr. Mayor, is then you would say, would you like to speak to the motion? Because I did not know where the motions start. I know it started, I don't know where it stopped and where we got into that. So I believe that's the way we should do it. Correct me if I'm wrong, sir.
That's correct. I was just going to clarify the motion, first of all. So the motion from Council Matties is directed on page 11, which is the Community Recreational Detailed Design and Tender Phase 1, which is scheduled for 2020 at a cost of $1.5 million coming from developer recreational contributions and reserves. And to postpone it to 2021. Okay, and she's already spoken to it? Okay, so practically, so whatever the initiative is what it should read.
Design and tender.
Okay, so Councilor Matties has already spoken, made comments to that. So members of council, open up the floor for questions to the mover, and then questions to administration, and again to debate. Okay, Councilor Laurie?
Thank you, Your Worship. A question through you to Councillor Matties. You've made this motion in respect to the detailed design and tender to move it out by a year, but you have not mentioned anything in respect to the item on page 12, the Community Recreation Center Construction Phase 1 for 2021 to 2023. So are you looking to move the construction portion out by a year as well? Or are you looking to just push the design and tender back to 2021 with the anticipation of still moving forward on the construction aspect in 2021 as well?
No, Councillor Laurie, I was basically saying that the design and tender would move to 2021, and then the corresponding rest of the project would follow suit, and so move to 2022 through to 2024.
Thank you. So, Your Worship, just for clarity, I'm wondering if maybe Councillor Matties would like to add the postponement as well of construction phase 1 to 2022.
I would.
Okay.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Second, I'm just gonna get that on the table first. So it is to,
Yes, but then construction.
any other questions, comments, debate? Councilor Bennett?
A question first to our administration. On page 11, I see that the funding source for this design and tender comes from the developer recreation contribution and reserves. So my question is, would that impact our tax initiative for 2020? If we do this, if we remove it?
Your Worship, through to Councillor Bennett, just to clarify the tax rate, you're wondering if there's impact on the tax rate?
Yes.
There is no impact on tax rate with this motion. It's all reserve funded and the recreation offsite levy fund, so no impact to tax rate.
And my second question, Mr. Mayor, is to you. Did you not receive a correspondence from Spruce Grove's mayor about support that Spruce Grove is indicating in their corporate plan
Yes.
for our recreation
So
center?
Spruce Grove did their 3S corporate plan last week, and they have earmarked that they've actually added an extra $9 million to their corporate planning process for 2022-3 to give us $23 million, $15 million, I'm gonna do the math here, $15 million towards a recreational facility. So we have 2023.
2023,
Yeah.
they would have money.
Which goes well with our plan, because when we look at the beginning construction of 2021, we will not be finished till 2023, which then we will need funding, because then that's when the debenture comes due, and therefore we'll have the money there. Again, it's a placeholder, but Spruce Grove is looking at a regional level, and they are at the table with us. It is the other regional partner that we have to work with. And and that the fact that this does not affect our tax base, because we already approved $500,000 from 2019 that's going towards this. An extra $600,000 is coming from reserve, and the other exchange is coming from the recreational reserve. So it's not going to affect our tax base. I think it'll hurt our economy more than it will help anything in our community. We talk about economic development, growth, and new businesses in our community. Well, putting this off will guarantee you that we will have it delayed in that.
One more question that I had, Mr. Mayor, and this is to administration. Administration, during our strategic planning session in January, what was our top priority when it came to initiatives for our future?
Your worship, and to the rest of the council, the recreation complex or planning and construction, potential construction, was the #1 priority identified by council at that time.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes, thank you, Worship. I want to point out just one thing, though, that we did receive with that from council and from the mayor in Spruce Grove is his comment was all of these planning numbers are just that, and how we realistically move forward on funding in our current economic climate with challenge our collective spirit and will. So I think what we have to be cautious to what you had just addressed to is they may have that in there, no different than we have as a will of council. That has been our #1 priority. In this climate, we must remember that everybody within our community, everyone within our organizations also have had to look at ways to cut what they are doing today. And I think it's really important as we sit around this table and debate what we think is the #1 priority, we have to reconsider all of that. One of the things that really disappoints me today about what we see in front of us is the lack of what was there before. Knowing that there's a 14% that you talked about last night, a 14% tax implication that could be part of what we're doing today, and not knowing what that is makes it hard to decide what is a priority and what is not a priority. When we do our strategic planning, it is done with the best of interest on all of our parts. But climate change within our region, and we can call it what we want, has made us have to look at things differently, and all levels of government are doing that today. So I just want to cautious when we talk about certain things here today, that we should be really looking forward to the future and what all of this has as an implication on the town going forward.
Councillor Loy?
Yes, thank you, and I thank the Deputy Mayor for his comments. I agree with you, we really have to be cautious. But I also think that we have to say, and it was mentioned last night on more than one occasion, I think the word was kick down the road, that we keep punting something down and punting something down. I don't know how many councils there have been since 1967, but that's the last covered arena that was built in this town. The population of that town would 3,000-4,000. We're 18 thereabouts. This is not going to be built for a couple of years. It's to get us going. What's our population going to be then? 20, 21,000? I think there are times when we have to say, okay, we do the strategic planning. We've identified it on more than one occasion, the strategic plan over 3 or 4 years, and it keeps staying up there. We talk about economic development, that we can't get people to build in our community because we don't offer the services that young families want. It's a precarious thing, but I don't want to see these things get pushed out further and further. That's my comment at this point.
Councillor Lowry?
Thank you, Your Worship. Very valid comments across the board. This is something that I've taken quite a serious look at as well, and I definitely have some concerns, but I also think that it's an incredibly important project, not only to our municipality, but to our region. The first thing I have is just questions to our administration. First and foremost, the initiative that appears in front of us on table 5, which is at page 11, is for $1.5 million. I'm just looking for clarity because we did approve $500,000 in 2019. So is this approval for $1.5 million in addition to that $500,000, million, or is this only looking for approval of $1 million?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, my understanding is the $500,000 is already funded, so this initiative would be $1 million would be used from reserve. The total of this particular initiative is 1.5.
Excellent, thank you. And so that brings me to my second question then. With respect to the fact that the $500,000 has already been approved in the 2019 corporate plan, if this motion passes, that would only remove $1 million. So what does administration see that we could continue to do throughout 2020 with the $500,000 that have already been approved and allocated?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie and the balance of council. As you know, on November 12th, we'll be talking about this topic in great detail, and there will be some pretty robust conversation, I believe, about this particular topic, including our steps moving forward. There's several decision points that have to be made before we even get to the point of spending $1.5 million on a detailed design. At this point, we're looking at a $30 million total cost for a facility, of which has not been identified at this point. So I'm sure, and based on the comments that we're hearing this evening, administration would not simply go out and spend $1.5 million simply to spend $1.5 million on detailed design. There would have to be some pretty concerted confirmations from the elected table, and part of those questions that we'll be asking is what level of regional partnership is required for us to move and continue moving forward on this particular project. So those are items that have to yet be checked off, and those are items that, as we have continued along the continuum and spectrum of working through this particular project, we've continued to share with council that there's several jumping off points and several decision points and several critical moments in time that council will have to make decisions. This is just one of those particular decisions. If we're ready to go to detailed design in as this initiative says, in 2020, certainly it'll take at least 12 months for the detailed design to be completed. So if we start in September on a detailed design, then certainly construction will not start until 12 months after that fact. So our desire is to continue forward with this project and continue the momentum and continue talking with our regional partners and to ensure that we understand what the funding levels are from our regional partners and the community when we work forward and move forward towards the eventual reality of a recreation facility in our community. That being said, we still require a lot of decisions and a lot of confirmations from council with respect to we're all comfortable with what we're prepared to endorse and move forward as part of this overall project. The first step is getting it detailed designed. The first step is agreeing to what we're going to detail design. This money permits us the ability to do so. If this motion is not accepted this evening and is delayed or not approved, then we would have to be coming back to council at some point in the future to gain approval to spend this money to do detailed design, which could delay the detailed design and the further movement of this particular project in terms of the facility being built in the timelines that we've described in the two initiatives.
Excellent, thank you. And just a few further questions and comments on this. So one part of this, and thank you very much for the explanation. I think one of the things that I consider on this very strongly is that in order to continue conversations with our regional partners, we do have to continue to evolve and get a better idea as to what it is we're looking at, how that's going to play out, what type of a facility it is, and again, some of the costing, et cetera, that comes with that. And a lot of that information will be flushed out through this detailed design. In this document, in this initiative though, it's detailed design and tender. And I do see that the actual issuing of the tender is not included in this. It's actually included in the initiative for 2021 to 2023, but this does have the tender document preparation portion in it. Is that just because with the detailed design, essentially you have all the information for the tender, so it goes hand in hand? Or is that once we get the detailed design, then we would put that out to an entity to create that tender document? I'm just wondering essentially if those two items are coupled together, or if it's this item has to happen and then this item can happen.
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie. So basically this is a little bit about project management. Typically on a $30 million project, if someone's detailed designing that, they know the ins and outs. So when you get to a general contractor who's going to go ahead and build it, they would represent our community with respect to, they drew the drawings, they understand the intimate details of what the design looks like. They can answer the technical questions of anyone that is providing a bid or is successful in the bid and has questions as the construction project moves forward. So typical practice is whoever designs continues forward through the construction side of the project, which includes the detailed design and tender.
And so then in continuation with that, so if we went forward with this initiative, however, the construction, the issuing of the tender and the construction of the facility was delayed, would that cause a negative impact then on that tender that had been prepared? Would that create uncertainties and disjointedness with regards to the consistency through to when that tender was finally issued? Essentially what I'm wondering is if we're doing this step, but the actual construction of the facility isn't approved for, let's say, 3, maybe even 5 years, do we lose that connection and that ability for that, as you mentioned, that contractor to essentially be the conduit for that information?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, the only example I can provide you with is Heritage Park. As an example, the detailed drawings were at 85% on the phase 3 component of that. And they sat on the books from, I think, 2010 until we constructed in 2015. So there are complications around that. Fortunately for us, the procurement rules at the time allowed us to go back to the original contractor that designed the building, and that was the best option for us because they had all of the documentation and had the ability to go back and quickly look and finish off those detailed drawings. If we sat for 3 or 4 years and that architect was not prepared to move forward with the project, I would expect that another architect wouldn't necessarily take the drawings of another firm and take them upon that work as their own, and there might be some throwaway with respect to that expenditure, simply because code issues may have changed, so they would have to go through and do an intensive review of that to ensure that everything that has been detailed and designed meets the code of the day. They might have engineers that they work with that they have a more comfort level, and some of the design elements are not the same, so there would be some complications and challenges that we would have to navigate through should the original detailed design architect not carry forward to the construction side of the project.
Thank you. So just the further comments then, Your Worship. Obviously, given our current economic times, it's we're looking at some very tough decisions and moving forward, and there's very limited certainty on our immediate future. We've just seen a provincial budget. We're going to see federal budgets, and we're not sure exactly what that's going to look like for our municipalities. We've already seen the way our provincial budgets are going, and the likelihood that we will see that continue with a little bit of the downloading to the municipalities. You did mention Spruce Grove's commitment to this project in earmarking $15 million, but you were a bit amiss in the timing because they have identified this within the long term of their capital plan, which is 2023 to 2029. There was nothing in Mayor Houston's communication, and there's nothing in their corporate plan indicating that this is earmarked for 2023. It's in their long-term capital plan, but taking direct quotation from their corporate plan, they're in the process of reframing. And if you read between the lines on their reframing, it means that they are looking at a brand new fiscal reality. And if you take a look at things like their debenture borrowing and where their limits sit, it's incredibly high, to the potential upwards of 90% of their debt limit. So I think it becomes a very precarious place for us to count on those funds and to count on a year that those funds are going to come through. We've heard many times from Parkland County, them expressing significant concerns on the asks of them from the multiple municipalities to which service their residents. And I believe the number was there were 6 different recreation projects that they were being asked for funding on. We've just seen in the last week some significant changes in their organization that I don't think we're going to see anything improving in the short term. And so I, again, don't believe we can rely on funding for a project at this scope in the short term. We're also in the midst of a tri-regional plan that will help start set the frameworks for future regional projects and how funding of those projects may work. I do think we have some positives with the TLC debenture set to conclude in 2021, which will free up approximately $225,000 of debenture repayment a year. But again, as I look at the $11 million that was proposed, I think we're looking, if memory serves me right, somewhere between about $400,000 to $500,000 a year. So we still would be looking at doubling it. Our current situation for reserves is not very favorable, and accessing almost $900,000 in reserve funding to continue on with this project, in addition to the $600,000 in the recreation levy, again, does leave me with a little bit of concern. I would like us, though, to continue to work on the project. One thing I think is very important for us to consider is when we look at our last regional recreation facility, the Tri-Leisure Center, that initiative actually went out to a plebiscite to our residents. And so this is a very big decision, and it's a very trying time. And we have an opportunity in 2021 with the municipal election to consider whether a plebiscite would be something that would or would not be appropriate for this decision as to how much input we would like the residents to have in this. From a personal standpoint, I think it's a pretty reasonable option, because if we are going to ask residents to bear a significant load on the tax rate in order to support this facility, I do think it is relatively fair for them to have the opportunity to respond to that. But in order to put the information out appropriately at that time, I do feel we need to continue on with the detailed design. Because without the detailed design, we don't truly know the scope of the project, and we don't know exactly what that impact will look like. So I cannot support the motion that is up on the screen right now, because I do feel we need to continue progress on this project, but we need to do that cautiously. We've heard from the general manager that there are many points throughout this process as we go forward that essentially, they're crucial decisions, and in order to move forward to the next one. So even though we are approving this initiative here today, I think there's going to be many points throughout this process where we will have checks and balances. We will have opportunities to determine as to how we want this to look. And ultimately, in our strategic planning session in January, we will also then get another great time where we can set the tone and our realistic expectations for this project. Hopefully, as the next 365 days go by and we look towards our 2021 corporate plan, we will end up with a better picture and a better indication as to how the future will look in respect to funding from our regional partners, from the province, and from the federal government. Ultimately, I think we heard from our GM of Corporate Services, this does not affect the tax base. This is a project we've already invested significant time and significant money in. It's been on the books for many, many years. It is important to our community, and even though maybe today it's not our top priority, I would bet money on it that it's probably still within Council's top 3. So I think it's still very important that we proceed with it. I think we should proceed with caution and realistic expectations, but as I mentioned, I will not be able to support the motion that's up this evening. Thank you.
Councilor Marr, anything to add?
Not much, but I really anticipated this conversation to be more like a transit versus rec. So I had written a great speech, which now doesn't make any sense. But there are a few good points in it that I would just like to add. This corporate plan is one that is focused on growth. I hear my fellow councillors talk about sort of tough times that we're looking at, and I've heard many times over that is when governments should spend. I would characterize this as sort of a 1-2 punch with the rec facility and the transit. We want to fill those buses when we bring that along, and that means giving a reason for those people to come to our town and stay. I would echo Councillor Loy's comment about people are leaving our community because of lack of options. I think of my folks and my family. They're tired of seeing their kids leave this community and start their families in other communities. They want to see it for their families just as much as the young people are tired of living on the road all the time. This is a priority. I mean, certainly it is a priority for me. I would like to just also make a point about the venture things. Now, if I understand how we read the article, I had asked about it yesterday, regarding what our borrowing limit was, and then I had read it backwards. As it turns out, worst case scenario with the storm rates could push us towards that 49% of our borrowing limit. That would just be over. Like Spruce Grove has set their self-imposed limit at 50%. We would be just over that. And that's worst case scenario. So I don't think we are nearly in the financial troubles. You know, like the dollars are there. Administration has done a really good job of finding those dollars and clearing a lot of the other items on our corporate plans in years past aside to make room for these things. So,
Thank you.
anyhow, that's it.
Thank you. I will give my comments.
I haven't given any comments, I just asked questions.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Bennett.
So I won't be supporting this motion. And I have to explain a little bit, Mr. Mayor. As most of you know, I'm not a numbers person. So it comes to debentures and does it balance? Yeah, okay, I get the big picture. I'm more of a picture person. And so when we were doing our strategic planning, our whole strategy, we have a plan, and it's a plan for economic development, it's a plan for growth, it's a plan for our community. In the last few years, every single one of our plans is fitting together in a beautiful picture, and that is to build up our downtown. We have some facilities going in downtown to bring people to live downtown. We're having our beautiful new library right downtown. Why are we doing that? Why didn't we build a library here or here? It's because we have a plan. And that plan is to make our downtown viable. It is to make, it is that we have land. Our boundaries go all the way out to Range Road 12. On the east side, we are butted against Spruce Grove. But we have lots of room to grow, and that is where our future is. When we talk about economic downturn, and we can't do this, we can't do that, you know, it just seems to me that we're wringing our hands. We can't do it, we can't do it, we have to watch our money. That is when people with vision know that when they have a plan, they have a picture, they are building for the future. That's what we have to take a step for. This design is one step. We're not saying that it's going to all happen overnight. We are saying this is the first step. And if we start pulling up and saying, no, we can't, we're too afraid, then that's where Stony Plain's going to be. We are going to be stuck here instead of growing and developing and building a new community and a better community. I cannot support a motion that is going to keep us in place for another year, which just compounds what we have on our plans. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Before I ask you to close, Councilor Matties, I'll give you my reasons. I think I will not be supporting the motion. I understand the intent where you're coming from, that the dollars might be tight, but it's not for construction. It is to move on our next step forward in our developing our community. The dollars that are earmarked for here are from reserves that we have built up for this. So we've actually put money aside so that we can take money out to do this. Again, good financial planning. We've also earmarked $500,000 from 2019 budget. That's also carried forward so that we can complete this plan. And you mentioned about talking to regional partners, etc. I'll give an example of Heritage Park Phase 3. Council at the time batted around for quite a few years, and we never pulled the trigger on it. We always said we needed more money, we needed insurances from our neighbors. They never came. Do you know when they came? Is when we pulled the trigger on to do something. And we're not even at that step yet. We're at the step designing and phasing it out so that we can actually have dollars and a business plan to present to them to say, this is what it will cost. Right now, we have nothing of that. You also mentioned about working with the provincial and federal governments to get grant funding. Everything that I have seen, you need a shovel-ready project to apply for those grants. This gives that opportunity to be shovel-ready, so when a grant is released, we can be first in the queue to apply for it. If we're not, then we take the year to design it and to tender it out. Well, we've already missed the boat on those grants. So totally not what I want to see, because I want to make sure that we're at the trough when the grants are released. We talk about economics, growth in our community, business attraction. All that is hinged on a strategic plan of having a recreational center in the town of Stony Plain. From the 2009 indoor recreational facility study to the updated 2016, it calls for a recreational facility in the town of Stony Plain. And that's why we have been moving forward in this direction over the last few corporate plans. Right? I talked to many residents in our community that they are leaving our community. They're spending dollars outside our community, exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do for us, the town. I have families that are leaving community for hockey, ringette, leisure, swimming. And what are they doing? They're spending their dollars outside of our community. So there's very little returning to our community, which actually hurts it. So with that, Councillor Matthews, I cannot support your motion. I think this is a long-term plan that we've had coming for the last few years, and this hits 4 of our 5 pillars that we stand for: economic development, community development, regional partners, governance, infrastructure. The only thing that we can address that's not quite currently on here is the environmental stewardship pillar. And that could be addressed through the detailed design if we're going to have rooftop gardens, if we're going to recover the rainwater. Those are things of the environmental aspect that we have not touched on yet, which can be filtered out through the design phase. So with that, I'm not going to support it, but I'll let you go and summarize.
Your Worship, can I ask a clarification from administration before I summarize?
Sure.
I would like to ask a clarification with regards to the words design and then tender. So my concern was that once we design and that we go to tender, that tender then meant we were on the road, we were doing this. And I'm hearing some gray information that says that tender does not mean that. So can you please clarify exactly what that would mean?
Your Worship, yeah, I think the GM will address that. Go ahead.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Matty. So when we talk about tender, the only time that the town of Stony Plain would be committed to building the project is if we put it to tender with the intent to award the construction. We can prepare a tender and not issue the tender. So you can do the detailed design, do all the work related to preparing the documents, but it doesn't really put the town of Stony Plain in a liability situation until such time that we post it with the intent that someone's going to bid on it, and we have the intent to pay someone to construct something on our behalf. Once we do that, there are provisions within the procurement rules that permit us to back away from that, and some of that could be cost, some of that could be, it's built into the documentation, but it's a very tricky slope when you should be intending to continue on to the construction phase if you're putting a tender out into the open market. So again, council would have to provide us that direction that they're prepared for us to issue the tender for construction, and we would do so, and then we would move the project forward. So the tender documents and the detailed design can be completed. It doesn't necessarily suggest that we're going immediately to construction, but that typically is the sequential steps that are followed.
Just one follow-up. So I'm not exactly clear then. You can't separate those two. You can't just do the design. Why exactly do we need to do the tender?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matties, you do not have to do the tender with the design. Reason why we would include the tender documentation with the design is because typically you carry the architect forward that detailed the project through to the construction and the design element of, through to the construction element of the next phase, simply because they understand the technical details of what has been drawn. It would be very difficult for another firm to come in and understand the technical details, and we certainly do not have the expertise in-house to answer the technical questions related to a facility of that size.
It also gives us a ballpark number when we have those numbers so that we can talk to our regional partners. If we just come up with a design, well, we've seen a design, but there's no numbers attached. It's just a balloon, like a number that we just attach to it. This will have more detailed and finite numbers that we can actually approach them for what we think the appropriate funding level is. Okay.
Can I ask a question of clarity? Thank you, Your Worship. Just a question of clarity. You mentioned obviously getting the tender documents ready. There's differences between an RFP, an RFQ, and an RFI. Obviously, like I said, the RFP is a request for proposal, which would generally be, we are intending to move forward with this now. Having those documents, if we continue to move through this process, would that then allow us to potentially issue either an RFI or an RFQ where we might be able to get a better estimate from multiple firms as to what we would be looking at for this project?
Your worship, through to Councillor Laurie, excuse me. The example I can use for you is we would pre-qualify, which is no different than a tender process. We did that with the RCMP detachment. We had the detailed drawings, we pre-qualified, but that still provided the intention that we were going to build something. All that pre-qualification does is it means they get to go away and sharpen their pencils and come back, and then we're picking basically on price. So an RFP, a request for proposal, we probably typically would not use that in a construction process.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Councilor Matthews.
So basically, with regards to my motion, the justification or the rationale behind it is basically twofold. First of all, with regards to the economic reality that we're dealing with the Alberta government, and also on a federal level, the federal government, our Canadian economy is not strong. It is basically running at about 1.5%. Provincial government's less than 1%. In terms of our regional partners, we have had Parkland County lay off a significant number of people because of the economic situation that they find themselves in moving forward. And with regards to what was just discussed with Spruce Grove, the commitment is longer term in terms of looking at the 2023 area. We have, if I was to suggest that 50% of our population probably doesn't have $200 at the end of each month, so they can pay, first of all, with their income, they can pay for their rent or their housing, they can pay for their basic, necessities. But then you end up with a situation like that where you still need to fund your children's education, your retirement. Most people don't have pension plans. So when you're looking at the average individual, when we start adding $25 a month increase in effective tax, whether you call it a utility or a tax, we're putting people in another more difficult situation to be able to accomplish the goal. So I take it very seriously that as we're moving forward with this, I'm 100% supportive of the recreation complex without question. Having said that, I am just asking that we postpone this by 1 year so that we can get a better pulse of what is happening with regards to our regional partners, where we're more settled with regards to what's happening with the Alberta government, and how our economy is turning around. I don't have any problem at all with doing a detailed design, but I have a problem with moving forward with that when we don't even know what our infrastructure costs are going to be related to storm management. That's not coming for 6 months. We have a 2-year capital request process that we need to go through with the Parkland County. And on top of it, we talk about growth. We've got many growth things happening in this community. We have an amazing new downtown. We have a library coming in. We have new buildings coming in the downtown area. We have brand new highways. We have a cemetery coming. There are many, many things that are moving us forward. So, and on top of it, a transit system regionally that will allow us to move people back and forth throughout our communities. So on that basis, in terms of my motion, it was to move everything 1 year from now so we can have a pulse of what's going on. So I still support that.
Thank you, Councilor Matterson. Thank you, members of council, for your deliberation and debates. I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, that's defeated. It is a little after 7:30 right now, so we'll call a 10-minute recess and we'll come back. continuing with the corporate plan. So we had the first motion to adjust the corporate plan. Thank you very much, Council Managers, for being the first. I believe that you won't be the last, so let's move on. Any other questions and comments? Can't see your hand. Can you raise it a little higher? Oh, yes, Councillor Bennett, I see you now.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I can't refer to a page in our package. I have to refer to this page in what we were given last night. It's on the Community and Protective Services 2020 page. Because I like the way this is laid out. It says specifically what the CAPS department is looking at. My question is the Shikawi 35th year anniversary. I know that it's coming up and it's a really important milestone for us, but in the past I have had residents ask about the cost to that. And I see that there is no cost attached anywhere in the binder. I couldn't find a cost attached to that. So I'd like to know the cost, and if administration could also subtract what our usual cost is. For instance, every year that we send a student delegation, in this year we won't be sending a student delegation, so how does that kind of all balance out? And that's my question.
Okay. So we haven't decided if we're setting a student delegation or not. That's still in conversation with the town of Shikawi.
Okay.
Okay, so go ahead, General Manager. So I guess it'll be the cost that's earmarked for the 35th anniversary of the Shikawi Town Stony Plain twinning, and as well as what our average cost is.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Bennett. So typically we budget $30,000 annually for the Shikawi Exchange Program, and which is typically our student delegation and the delegation from Japan coming to Stony Plain. We typically receive dollars from the town of Shikawi, which fluctuates depending on the number of students that they're sending, which helps support their travel to our community. Typically, when we're sending an adult delegation, which has been around our anniversary years. Typically, we were sending every second year, but I think we've pared that back to more along the lines of our 5-year cycle. We would increase that budget by to a total of $50,000 for the program, because there are people that travel over to Japan. When we do send people to Japan, if it's a council member, typically that cost is covered. If it's a community member, then our typical practice has been 50% of the cost is covered. That is to be determined as the trip is taken. So that could be 25%, that could be 50%, that could be 100% covered. So typically in discussions with the mayor and the delegation that selected, those decisions would be made at that time. And that is a revenue that comes back to the town of Stony Plain, so it helps to offset the overall cost for a delegation going over to Shikawi. The student delegation, as you referenced, we're suggesting that it may not go because of the Olympics. We haven't ruled out the fact that we may send students. It just will depend on cost. So if, as an example, if a ticket's going to be $5,000, then probably that's not, a reasonable expense that we would ask someone to pay to go over to Japan, or that we'd be prepared to expend, as that might limit us to 2 students as opposed to 10 students. So we would make that determination once we understand what the flights would be around that Olympic time, which is typically July when we send students, which is really getting into the height of the Olympics in Tokyo.
So, Mr. Mayor, we're budgeting about $50,000.
Yes.
Correct.
So about a $20,000 increase from our normal budget line item, because it's the 35th anniversary.
And some of that will some of the revenue, we will get revenue from that, from the town of Chicowie?
Yes, the town of Chicowie sends us money every year for the program.
Okay. Good, thank you.
Councillor Meyer?
I would like to make a comment in regards to that. So from what I understand from the conversation, because it's the 35th year anniversary, we are going to expend a little bit extra money to, a little bit more than we would usually. Yes? Okay. So not that I like to necessarily line items up against each other, but I would like everybody on the same page to notice service changes are Canada Day budget reduction. I would just like to draw everybody's attention to how the last federal election went and the result out here in Alberta and the level of what would be characterized as Western alienation. Would it be wise for maybe us to not reduce our Canada Day budget this year? I mean, I know it's a bit of a blip. I think it's a lot of just anger that we're seeing, but maybe this might be the year to celebrate Canada and reward that loyalty for people who haven't given up on Canada just because of one election. So I don't know if that would be a motion I would make.
Yes, Councillor Meyer, so thank you for your comment, and if you want to see that change, that'd be a motion coming forward.
Well, then I would like to make a motion that we do not reduce our Canada Day budget and leave it as previous year.
Okay, so let's get that on the screen first. Can the general manager tell us what the last year's budget was for Canada Day?
Your worship, I believe, unless I'm corrected here, I've just been told it was about a $12,000 cost reduction. So the motion would be adding $12,000 back into the operating budget, specifically marked for Canada Day.
Okay, so Councillor Meyer's motion is to increase the Canada Day budget celebration by $12,000. Councillor Meyer?
Yeah, that I agree. Oh, speak to it?
Yeah.
It's going to come up on the screen.
So the budget's already in there, so we're adding 12, so that'll show us a percentage increase.
Your worship, this is a 0.07% tax impact.
Okay. Go ahead and speak to it, Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, administration, for pointing out initially the cost is fairly insignificant, which should make it not as difficult a decision to be made. Just to my prior comments, this year has seen a bit of a pull at the fabric of our nation, and us doing a little bit extra to celebrate I think it would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. Before I go on to questions from members of council, I just want to clarify with Councillor Meyer, is this a one-time increase? You mentioned in your earlier statement that maybe this is the year that we do not do that. So is this an increase for 2020 budget, or is it increase for the 2020 budget and all subsequent years?
I would, considering that I do believe it is just a blip in anger, I think it would only be necessary to do 1 year increase.
Okay, so can we adjust the motion? Is that to move the town council to add $12,000 to the corporate plan for Canada Day celebrations in 2020? Thank you for that clarification, Councillor Meyer. You've already spoken to it, so members of council, I'll open the floor for questions to Councillor Meyer and debate. Deputy Mayor?
Just looking for some clarification, if I could, through administration. If this was this a intent because of the climate change in the federal policy? Was this a reduction because you believe that overspending in this category was affecting the town? Is this a reduction that hence there is not the participation anymore in that event?
Your worship, just briefly, you know, I'll give a little bit of background. So it's probably been about 6-7 years that we've kind of built more of a Canada Day celebration. If you go back about 10, 12 years ago, it might not have been quite so much. I think we originally, I believe the GM said we started at about $11,000 celebration years ago when we looked through the budget, and we were specifically looking for areas that maybe could be trimmed, frankly. This was one area that we thought, well, we could probably bring this back to the previous amount or close to it, and have a decent or a reasonable Canada Day celebration. So that was the rationale as we went through it.
Okay.
Just a follow-up question to that. Reasonable or decent? Are we downstepping what we're doing that drastically from an elaborate situation, or help me to understand this a little bit better? How you cut $12,000 out of a budget to get to a reasonable or?
Yes, so in other words, 50% of the budget has been cut from this budget item line. And how reasonable is that to continue to have celebrations at that?
Well, perhaps reasonable wasn't the right word. I guess the idea was that we felt that the celebration at that dollar amount would still be well received by the community.
Okay. So if members of the council can recall, typically Stony Plain does not do a Canada Day celebration or fireworks. Usually that is left to the city of Spruce Grove. And then in Stony Plain we do first night, so New Year celebration. And the city of Spruce Grove does not do one. So I think what the town manager is alluding to is that we've started doing a few things and that we've just let that escalate without actually controlling that and talking to our regional neighbors. Hence, that's why City of Spruce Grove does not have a first night celebration. They don't do fireworks that, then they don't have events. We do. And so it's always been a partnership between the two communities. Councillor Loy, please.
Yes, thank you, Worship. I'm inclined to support this motion at the present time. I just need a bit more information. If we left that $12,000 out, how would that change the look of Canada Day celebrations as we've known it, let's say, for the last 3 to 5 years? What would be significantly missing?
I'll ask perhaps the general managers that are more directly involved to
Thank you, Your
respond
Worship.
to the specifics.
Your Worship, through to Councillor Loy, there'd be less inflatable tents, and perhaps there would not be a circus that would take place during Canada Day, or some of those other large cost items that have come into our Canada Day over the past 3 years. The Citizenship Ceremony, as long as the federal government still supported, would still continue. The food trucks, they come and they sell their food. It's not a cost to that particular event. Face painting typically is not a cost, but sometimes we do pay the artist to come, which could revert to the parent has to pay $3 for the face to be painted, as opposed to the town covering that cost on behalf of the families that attend that event. So those are the types of things that we've been looking at. The same holds true for our mini monster bash in terms of that's becoming a larger cost item too. So we're looking at, do we continue to escalate the costs, or do we have to start charging a nominal fee so that we can bridge the costs that continue to keep creeping related to some of these special events? And that's the debate that we continue to have when we provide special event programming.
Thank you. If I follow up on that, Mr. Mayor, some of these items I think can go missing without a significant loss to the actual day itself. I don't know what the person who made the motion can do, even if it's not 12,000, if it's half of that or something like that, to keep a semblance of what people can expect. It's not my motion. I'll let the Councillor Myers mull that over, and if he wants to make any changes.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Loy. Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and appreciate administration's comments. I've just got a few here as well. Obviously, the number one thing I was concerned about was the citizenship ceremony. So I'm very grateful to hear that that is something that, as long as the federal government is willing to keep in our community, that we will see. I think when we talk about national pride, for those of you who've had the opportunity to attend it, it is an absolutely fantastic experience, and I truly hope that we see that continue. What I did hear that I really like to hear is exactly that, is that even though we might be removing a cost from this, we are looking at other ways to continue to ensure that this ceremony and this celebration remains just that. One thing that I can speak from experience, my kids used to incredibly enjoy was the bike parade. And really, I don't know if there was any cost to putting that on, and I know now that we've moved the festivities down to the pavilion, that that's maybe made a little bit of logistical change in it. But that was something that when we talk about community building, when we talk about national pride, you're basically instilling that in children where they had the opportunity to go out and at their expense purchase all kinds of decorations, etc., for their bikes, and there were usually stations there where there were maybe some materials not there. And it's things like that that I think really bring these community celebrations together. I don't think because we have a community celebration we necessarily need to just increase costs and continue to increase costs. I think we need to continue to be creative and look for ways in which we can make these events as best as possible while either scaling back the actual expense of them, or as was mentioned by the general manager about, maybe instead of the town paying for a sparkle tattoo artist, maybe the actual person who is looking for that service, pays a small nominal fee. And, those costs to the town significantly add up when we're covering 100% of it. And maybe we could look at there's some kind of cost share where maybe, if we pay half of the tattoo artist or something like that, so that it's only a toonie or something like that. So I appreciate, administration continuing to sharpen their pencil and continuing to find these reductions. I do agree it is a relatively small reduction. I would be more so inclined to support this if this were to potentially be funded out of a reserve rather than out of tax base. I just think it seems so nominal to add this back into a tax base for a one-time thing. It doesn't necessarily make sense. So, I mean, if there's a specific reserve that can maybe be accessed for this, but again, I also don't really think the need. I think we would be inclined to give administration free rein to, they've scaled the budget back. I would say put that challenge out to them to make this Canada Day celebration the same and or better than past years at half the cost. And if we feel that administration isn't able to achieve that, then maybe that's something we look at going forward.
Councilor Bennett?
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. I need some clarification. So last night I took notes, and when we talked about this, I wrote down that we're back to $10,000. So that's what's in the budget for now. So are you saying that our last Canada Day celebration cost $22,000? Or what was the cost of our last Canada Day celebration?
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett, that's correct. 22,000 was spent in 2019 and 19,000 in the previous year, 2018.
I'm sorry, how much was 2018?
19,000.
So it just continues to, I don't know if you have the numbers. Has the art walk, since the town is now organizing it, has that increased the cost of the Canada Day celebration?
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett. So just to provide a bit of history, the multi-center used to run Canada Day. That's where the bike rodeo used to occur. They came to the town 6 or so years ago and said, we're no longer doing Canada Day. And the town deemed it was still an important event. And we put $10,000 into the budget to do a Canada Day. So with Canada Day, we have the car show, we have the art walk, which is a community, both of those are community partnerships. And then we also apply our $10,000 to hosting the Citizenship Ceremony, which I think used to fall under culture. So I think the blending of the two budgets came together. And then we provided more opportunity for people to celebrate Canada Day for the 4-hour period of which we host the event. The other thing to note is the City of Spruce Grove has an event happening, a larger event happening in their community roughly around the same time. So a lot of people come to our event and they'll then travel over to the city of Spruce Grove and finish their Canada Day at their particular event. So the mayor is right in terms of we typically didn't do a Canada Day before the multi handed it back to the town of Stony Plain. That was completed by the city of Spruce Grove. We've since got into doing a smaller Canada Day because we do know a larger event is happening with our neighboring community, and some people do head over to that. There are families that appreciate coming to our Canada Day and spending a couple of hours in our community, and that's all they do for Canada Day, and then they go off and spend time with family rather than going into the larger City of Spruce Grove event. But there's a fair amount of our community that also travels to the City of Spruce Grove and appreciates that event. So the CAO was correct in terms of when we looked at the overall tax implication of the 2020 budget and areas that we could bring it back to still a good event, but we can still bring it back to what we initially started with respect to a budget allocation, and that's where we landed. So that's the history and a little bit of a background around that.
So the cost of the art walk?
That it's not. The artists come, they put up their events, we provide the space. Probably if I had to stretch, I would say that because our staff are out there coordinating it, there's a cost, but it's not really a cost.
Okay, thank you.
Any more hands up? So before I let you close, I'll give you my thoughts. Councilor Meyer, I think it's a good idea to add it. I happen to kind of more side on the caution of that we need to kind of sharpen the pencils a little bit, and if we can provide a similar service of Canada Parade that we've done before without having the same dollars spent on it, I'm looking forward to seeing that come through. I think every area in our corporate plan has been looked at with a fine-tooth comb, and then pencils were sharpened to get down to where we are today. So I will not support your motion. Go ahead. Do you want to summarize?
Yeah, sure. I think back to this summer's RCMP musical ride and its ability to boost my level of pride in my nation. I can only imagine what the effect was on the young children that were there that day. We don't have a ton of opportunities for those types of events to come through, and they're valuable. They're especially valuable at a time, like I say, when our nation's fabric is getting a little pulled about, and I think it would be an appropriate response, and it would be money well spent.
Thank you. Thank you for that. So I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Okay. And that is defeated. Okay. Thank you. Moving on, we'll continue with the corporate plan. Any other questions, comments, and proposed motions going forward? Councilor Laurie, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'd like to propose a motion that Town Council reduce the operating budget for the Stony Plain Golf Course from the proposed 2020 budget of $2,145,967,000 to the 2019 budget amount of $1,903,000, $1,903,170.
So that
There's going to be 2 pages that I will be referring to. I guess 3. Number 31 in our printed copy. Sorry, I moved my page here. I've got to find back where this page was. Oh, we have a few seconds while administration gets that up. Come on, where are we?
Page 31.
31, and then, sorry, there's going to be one other page. I just have to get back to it. And of course, I didn't mark it. Here we are. So 31 and 43 in our printed package, and then the summary sheet that we received today.
Okay, so the motion is by Councillor Laurie is to reduce the golf course expenditure budget to the 2019 levels of $1,903,170. $903,170. And that's a reference to page 31 on our corporate plan. Okay, we'll just give administration a minute and just give me a nod when you got it up, and I'll let Councillor Laurie start. Good. Okay. Okay. Before I let you start, I just want to make sure there's a clarity here. Reducing the expenses, then in turn, we're going to reduce the revenue so that they match, right?
Yes.
Okay. So it is to those levels.
Balanced budget.
Yeah. So it would be to move the reduction of golf course to the 2019 levels of like $1 million to a balanced budget.
Page 31, Linda.
That's the full expenses, like that amortization.
Okay, go ahead, Councillor Laurie, you can start.
Thank you, Your Worship. We had a lot of conversation around this already this evening, and so I'll just kind of summarize some of the stuff that I had. As we've mentioned, there's a new reality of fiscal restraint requiring us to make difficult decisions and accept what we are now seeing as our new normal. Understanding that the golf course has faced some challenges, I'm confident we're moving in the right direction. However, we must be mindful that this is a publicly owned entity and that ultimately the performance of this entity has significant impacts on other areas of the town operations. Improvements to the course and in food and beverage are positive steps forward and continue to push the golf course ahead in the industry. However, the actual results over the last several years continue to show significant losses from missed targets, and our economic outlook is not bright, leaving less money in people's pockets for recreation. Green fee and pro shop sales have remained relatively flat over the last 3 years and are projected to increase in this budget by 42% in 2020. As much as I would love to believe that this is possible, I feel this is a grossly unrealistic expectation, as in the last 7 years we have only exceeded this number once. The budgets for the actual green fee and pro shop revenues for the last 7 years I went through earlier, and just quickly to summarize for council, 2013 was a loss of $166,000 or 10%. 2014 was a loss of $94,500 or 6%. 2015 was a positive of $28,000 or 2%. 2016 was a loss of $140,000 or 9%. 2017 was a loss of $526,000 or 30%. 2018, a loss of $387,409 or 25%. And 2019, we are currently sitting at approximately $430,817 loss or 28%. However, given the comments this evening from the general manager, we are expecting that to improve to somewhere around $350,000 to $380,000 in loss. The reason why I'm going to continue to bring this forward after some of the conversations is as we look at some of the data, particularly one thing that was mentioned was rainfall days. And if you actually look back at 2016, where we achieved $1.4 million in revenues, we actually had more rainfall days than 2017 and 2018. 2019 numbers were agreeably a little bit higher than that of 2016. But if we can achieve $1.4 million in sales during a year where rainfalls are higher than the next 2 years, and the next 2 years our revenues are reduced by approximately $300,000, I'm not sure that I quite believe that rainfall days are necessarily 100% to blame. We've also mentioned things like the condition of the golf course and so on and so forth. Where my concern truly grows is the deficits that we have seen in this golf course and the projected deficits that we are now seeing in our corporate plan. As I mentioned, referring to page 43, we're showing a potential or an annual surplus deficit for 2019 estimated at $3.2 million. Therefore, if the golf course does come in at approximately $350,000 in the red, we're looking at approximate the deficit that there may sit around the 2.9. Now, this may already be included here, but as I look at 2020, this is where I have concern. Currently, the budget for the golf course for 2020 is projected to break even. I believe it's projected to make $358. But I call your attention to the 2019 budget, where the golf course was also projected to break even or make a little over $5,000. We now understand that we're sitting in a position where we are potentially going to see a significant deficit of that. As I mentioned, we're looking at $702,000 currently, less the revenues that are coming in, approximately $600,000, which does include the amortization for the new maintenance facility. So when I look at 2020 and our projected surplus or deficit sitting at $1.6 million, $600,000 of that is a significant amount if we carry over this year's results. But if we add $242,000 in additional expenses and projected revenues, and we do not see any growth or the 42% growth in revenues that are projected by the golf course, that will eat away at almost 50% of our projected surplus. When our projected surplus is already down over 50% from 2019. So I feel that these are very dangerous numbers, and I think we're at the point where we're seeing a significant reality over the last 3 years of what type of revenues that golf course will see. I think it's not just the condition of our golf course. I think it's not just the rain days. I think it has a significant portion to do with the economic realities that people are now facing. Golf is not an inexpensive activity. It is a very expensive activity, and as we know, as economic times get tighter, recreation and personal spending is one of the first things that people cut. When I see these increases, again, it just grows concern that we are writing a check to say you can spend $2.145 million on the golf course operations. I have no problem in the golf course spending $2.145 million on operations if they are seeing the revenues that they are projecting. But as we see over the data that I've collected and that has been shown in our audited financial statements, the projected revenues are not being realized. With this motion that I put forward, the adjustment in the projected revenues would bring us down from $1.565 million to $1.322 million, which would still be a 12.5% increase in revenues from this year. So, Your Worship, at this point in time, I think it's incredibly prudent that the golf course take a look at their budget, bring their numbers down from a revenue and expenses perspective to the 2019, and prove that they can either break even or make profit. If the golf course is projecting a surplus midway through the year and would like to create additional expenditures based on that, I have absolutely no problem with that. But I do have a problem with approving a $242,000 increase on an entity that has continually lost anywhere between $300,000 and $600,000 over the last 3 fiscal years.
Thank you. Members of council, open for questions of clarity to Councilor Laurie and debate. Start with Deputy Mayor.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just looking at the charts that he talked about here, and I'm a little bit confused. I see on the one that we got today in a handout that the actual budget is for 2022 146,325. In our page 31 of our corporate handout, I see that that budget is 214,597. I see for 2021 it goes to 214,750. Yet I see 2,220,021, and then I see in 22 we go to 2,144,000, and yet it says on the other sheet 2,220,000. So I'm just looking for a little clarification. Which number is the actual number that we're supposed to be looking at?
Right. So, okay, it's actually there.
Yeah. To Councilor Pletchko and administration can confirm if they want, you actually have to add in the non-cash amortization onto the expenses.
Right.
And that gives you the totals that you see, because I believe the non-cash amortization would be for the repayment of the maintenance, or no, sorry, what is?
Yes.
Your Worship, through the Councilor Laurie, that's correct. The amortization is included in the number that you see in the corporate plan. So the handout that was the attachment to that was given today, if you were to add the expense line item plus the amortization, it'll equal the numbers in the corporate plan.
Yes. Thank
So
you.
the amortization is a non-cash item on the buildings that we calculate from an accounting perspective.
So just in further to that, I still draw concern to the golf course. For 2019, we'll see a projected number of 1,490,596. However, we're still allowing them to do what was a projected number from the previous year of 1,900,000. Still, seems to me that we need to cut somewhere in the golf course to get us to a balanced budget. Based on the numbers that I see from 2018 to 2019, there is definitely a standard within the system. So however I do support what you're talking about, I would like to see that number reduced a little bit somewhere along the way as well.
Okay, Councillor Bennett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just need a little bit more information about the debenture payment that the golf course is actually making on the maintenance, on the new maintenance facility. I see that we have the interest on it. If we keep cutting the budget for the golf course, will they still be able to make that debenture payment? If my memory serves me, part of the cost of building that maintenance shed was that the golf course was going to pay for the debenture payments, and they were not going to be part of the tax rate. So I need some clarification.
Your worship, through to Councillor Bennett. So in the attachment 2 today, you can see the interest payment on the debenture is around $40,000. So for 2020, the budget is $40,130. And the principal payment would continue to be made. It's not an expenditure. It shows up on the balance sheet. It reduces our debt owing. But it is included when we look at the golf course numbers, but in the numbers you're seeing it as just the interest expense, which is how we report from a financial statement perspective.
So I guess my question is the golf course paying for that debenture, or is it part of the tax rate? Is the tax rate paying for that debenture?
Well, I can answer that. It's really easy. If they make their budget projections, then they're paying for it. If they're not, then they're subsidized by the tax rate. End of question.
Yeah, for your worship, for clarity there, so the golf course budgets and projections do include the payment of the debenture, principal and interest. So I think it's 40,000 and how much?
87.
Yeah, so about 120-some thousand a year is budgeted to be paid by the golf course, through their own budget, so to speak. And as the mayor's indicated, yes, in the if years where there would be a profit, you would consider that to be not paid through the tax levy, so to speak. In years where there's a deficit, it would be considered to be, you could say it's the debentures, you could say it's the whatever, any cost of the golf course is being funded by the tax levy.
So, so they have run a deficit for the last few years, and so it has been part of our tax rate. But if we reduce their budget even more, then how does that affect what? Because their budget,
Yeah, so it's a good line of questioning, Councillor Bennett. So with a budget is that it neutralizes itself. So if they have a $1 million revenue stream, they have $1 million in expenses, and that includes the debenture payment. What we're saying is we don't believe that you're going to make the revenue that you're suggesting, so we're going to reduce the expenses, which still includes their debenture payment, right? Hopefully that they do meet the revenue projections that we've lowered. And if not, then the operating expense then is poured on our taxpayers. If they make the revenue, as Councillor Lord has said, then they're paying for it, right? So it really doesn't matter how it's getting paid for it. The fact is that if they meet the revenue projections, then they're paying for it. If they don't, then we're paying for it. It doesn't matter if it's $10 million budget or a $2 million budget or a $1 million budget. If it neutralizes, it zeroes out, they're paying for it. If it's not, we're paying for it. And if there's a profit, then we'll get that money back. Like in the first 10 years of the golf operations, I believe there was a little over $1 million that was transferred from the golf course into general revenue which helped us not increase taxes because we took that $1 million over the last 10 years and we added it to our taxes so that we wouldn't have to raise taxes. Does that answer your question? So the answer
So
is
it's
yes.
not going to have a tax rate increase in what we're looking at this year?
No, not on the motion, because this is only a budget. We will only know at the end of the year after all the expenses have calculated and all the revenues is checked off.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Councillor Loy?
Yes, thank you, Worship. And to the general manager, if the motion goes through and it's reduced to 1,000,009, my question is, how will that affect the operation of the golf course in the upcoming year? More precisely, will it penalize any chance of becoming revenue neutral or showing a profit?
Your worship, through the Councillor Loy, no, we will just have to go back and look at the numbers, and we will just have to look at the areas, and perhaps we'll have to do less of something without impacting the golf course to a great degree. So I think there's probably an opportunity for us to go back and look at these numbers and meet that $200,000 reduction that's being proposed this evening.
Follow up to that, Your Worship, I've heard from several councillors here that we've had lots of numbers on the golf course, but there's so many numbers, I don't think any of us really have an accurate hold on what's going on. The only thing that I see here, the difference in, Councillor Laurie, what is the difference between the 1903 and the proposed
244,000.
240,000? So the only thing that I see with that now, that is just directly going to impact what we do for this year's budget and our tax implications. Am I correct?
No, Councillor Loy does have zero tax impact to us. All we're doing is sharpening the pencil to the golf course and telling them that they need to do what they believe is best with $1.9 million instead of 2.1.
So the 2.1 does not impact the taxes one bit?
No, because the revenue on the budget was 2.1 to offset it. So it was zero.
It impacts it though if it becomes a deficit at the
Yes.
end of the year.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to say, because that's projected, speculated, based really on no fact. This, like as you said earlier on, Mr. Mayor, anybody can come up with some numbers and present them. I'm not saying that they just came up with numbers, I'm not insulting the general manager. I'm just worried about the tax implication on this. If there is no tax implication on it, then I'm not inclined to support this. I would rather take a look at this very seriously. And in January, when we do have our strategic planning meeting, with some very, very accurate numbers that we can pin down. And then we have our spring adjustments, we can make any changes at that time.
Okay, thank you. And I would say that Councillor Laurie, when he made his opening statement, did that quite succinctly, of saying what the previous revenues have been for the last 3 years, and based a projection on that of a 12% increase from the cumulative 3-year average. So when your average is, for example, when your green-free revenue is at $1.2 million on average for the last 3 years, and all of a sudden that they expect it to be 1.5 million. And we know that the trend is not going up, the trend is going down. Yes.
Yes, we're talking about Stony Plain Golf Course, and that's the only one that we subsidize. But I would like to know the trends, if we're using that, of going down in green fees. Is that true with the half dozen or so golf courses that were in a 30-kilometer radius of us? Then I'd be more inclined to believe it. I really believe that our golf course suffered tremendously, A, with the weather, B, with the destruction of our greens. And people did not go, and there's many people who, groups of 8, 9, and 10 who go on circuit golfing, and Stony Plain was off their circuit because of everything. But our reputation and our food services was not up to the par that it should have been. And I believe that we've corrected all those problems. Time will tell in the numbers, but I really think that they were really facing a massive uphill battle, but I believe we've overcome it with the structural changes that are in there, the way the golf course is managed, the whole 9 yards. So if it's not a tax implication, then I'm willing to let what's on the book stay.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Members of council, any other questions, comments? Councillor Matthews?
Your worship, thank you. My question is to the General Manager of Corporate Services regarding the expenses that were incurred from 2018 to 2019 with regards to changing all the greens in the golf course. And in terms of, when I look at 2018 expenses were 1.8 million versus the 2019 of 1.903 or 1.9 million. So in terms of some of the costs that you're dealing with, and then secondly, in terms of where would you see that you could take $250,000 out of this budget? I mean, I look at your expenses, you've got grounds, pro shop, admin, amortization, and food, and it seems to me that it would be in staff somehow, if that's the case. So like, what I would like to see is the golf course come to us and tell us, are there some efficiencies, are there areas that we can, from this point, after all the work that's been done, that that there's maybe some additional efficiencies we can have, and then would make a decision in January. But can you elaborate a little bit with regards to what were the costs of the green fees and what was incurred there at that time? Because that makes a difference as to where we are today, right?
Your worship, through to Councillor Matties, again, we're talking about $250,000. A lot of that is probably related to the food and beverage, which we're still trying to get a handle on. So really the 1.9 that's being proposed tonight, I think we can go back and look at that number, and I think I can work with the staff at the golf course and we can provide a budget that will meet that 1.9. I think it's no different than any other aspect of community protective services. If you told me a $50,000 Canada Day was what you wanted, we would provide you a $50,000 Canada Day. If it was a $5,000 Canada Day, we would provide that too. So it's up to us to go back and look at how that will impact, and if there's dramatic impacts to the service levels that the golf course might be impacted by with respect to this $250,000 reduction, we would certainly come back to council and we would provide you with a detailed report on what your expectations should be for the 2020 golf season, and we would get your comfort level around that, and then we would have a different debate, another debate about whether or not the $250,000 is justified to continue cutting from the golf course, or if we're in alignment with the motion that's on the table this evening. So I think we do have time to go back and look at this. The tax implication does not hit a resident until the month of June. We have spring adjustment. We have some time that we can come back to council with more detailed conversation if needed. But certainly the direction provides us some parameters of which to work by, and we can certainly go back and develop a budget of which is being described this evening that will provide a level of service at the Stony Plain Golf Course.
Thank you.
Councillor Meyer?
I support this motion. I think it's important to start putting some kind of expectations around the golf course, but it doesn't sound like this will be the last we talk about this golf course. I'm requesting that when we do, that admin brings forward some discussion regarding the condition of the clubhouse, and if we can expect any expenses, and when we, I mean, it's got to be getting up there in age as well.
Your worship, just a couple comments on that. That would be part of the 10-year capital plan, of which all of us have mentioned some work will happen. It's not just restricted to Heritage Park and arenas and pools and sport fields. The golf course is a cost facility that is owned by the town of Stony Plain, and that would be part and parcel of the 10-year capital plan that we will develop and will drive some of our costing in the future.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? Hands up. Councilor, I don't know. I'm kind of torn right here. I believe I would support your motion. However, I had a motion of reducing more from the golf course budget. And this is the reasons why I have had more in my books. First of all, we looked at the maintenance part. It was mentioned to us that we redid our greens, which were at a cost of $150,000 more or less for 2019. So that increased the actual budget number by about $150,000 that was not netted for. Secondly, the increase we asked about food services were a mixture of staff wages, of overstaffing, and equipment that was purchased. And in that line item was an increase of close to $300,000. So if I just say, conservatively speaking, if we say $200,000 is equipment and $100,000 is staffing, well, there should be a reduction of $200,000 right there because we will not have to buy that same equipment again. Right, so therefore, and also mentioned by the general manager earlier regarding catering services, the revenue was 120 and the expenses was 120,000. He mentioned that it should only be about $80,000 to $90,000 of expenses because they believe that there'd be a 30% return rate on the catering services. So right there, we just saved another $30,000 in the budget. So my motion was to cut it down to the 2018 levels of $1.8 million was where I was going. So I do support the direction you're going. I would like it to go a little deeper because I think we can find synergies in the budget with the golf course. We understand that in terms of a corporate plan, there's a zero tax or budget increase right now because we don't know what the final numbers is. If we leave it at 1.9 as last year's, then we do not achieve that, and we want to achieve a 1.7 revenue stream. Well, that means $200,000 is borne by our taxpayers. I would like to see that down a little bit lower until we actually have numbers for the next 2-3 years going forward of increased green fee play, increased revenues, then that justifies the increase in expenses. Unless you're willing to make that as a friendly motion to change that, I'm going to pass the chair to Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do see your thought process and I do see where you're coming from. I'm not going to accept it as a friendly amendment, and once the motion has been made, I will speak to why.
Okay. Unless any other members of council want to make that motion? Deputy Mayor, you have the chair.
Go ahead.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, I'm making a motion to amend Councilor Lowry's motion to be moved that the town of Stony Plain reduce the Stony Plain Golf Course expenditure to the 2018 levels. Let me just add that up. Okay, so it's 1,823,137. We'll go 137. We'll give an extra $6. $1,823,137. Right, to a balanced budget. So that's the number I'm changing. With that, I will, Mr. Chair, I already made my comments of why I would support Councilor Lowry's motion. I just don't think the cut was deep enough. With that, I already said what I need to say. Go ahead.
Thank you. Any further council discussion? Go ahead, Councilor Lowry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Well, I appreciate the proposed amendment to the motion. In my review of this information, I was very cognizant of the fact that we have added a new food and beverage service to the golf course that does appear to be catching some momentum. I do acknowledge there were certainly some cost overruns for 2019, and I think that was just getting the toes in the water, figuring out exactly where we needed to be, and as the general manager mentioned, there was some unexpected equipment expenses that we did see there. What I do look at is the difference between the 2018 budget, the 2019 budget, and the 2020 budget when it comes to the food services, not only on the expenses side, but also on the revenue side. What the mayor has been proposing here is the reduction of a little less than $100,000 in the budget. However, the increases in the budget from 2019 to 2020 for the food services alone is $220,000. And the food services, sorry, that's using the $80,000 that the general manager had projected for the expenses of the catering, not the 120 that this document says, just for clarity's sake. So if we use what the document says, it's actually $260,000. But that also is now showing a significant revenue in the food and beverage service and in the catering side of things. My concern is that if we start to cut this down too low, we will potentially look at significant impacts to one area of the golf course that I do feel we can start realizing some revenues that will help offset the reduction in green fee and pro shop fees that we have seen. The reality is if you take the $1.9 million and you take the $220,000 out of the food and beverage, we're actually looking at the golf course aspect, not the food and beverage aspect, of going down to $1.7 million, which is less than what you're proposing today. So I do see where you're coming from, and I do agree that I would like to see the golf course continue to sharpen their pencil, and I would like to see the golf course continue to be effective. But what I am looking at is that balance of, as much as we are asking them to reduce some of the expenses, there's a significant expense to one of the new services that they have brought in that is truly showing some potential revenues, which may help the golf course get to a balanced budget. So at this point in time, I'm not willing to support the amended motion, though I agree with the premises to which it was made.
Councilor Laurie, any further discussion from council members? Your worship, would you like to close?
Yes, thank you. I ask members of council to support this motion to amend Councilor Laurie's original motion based on the numbers that Councilor Laurie himself presented, that the actual revenues were only $1.4 million. So for him to speak that and think that there would be significant increases might be true, but might not be true. Based on historical facts for the last few years, we have not. And also for the commentary that Councilor Laurie made regarding rainfall. The heaviest rainfall was in 2016 when we saw a decline in revenues, but yet 2017-18 had less rain than 2016, but we still saw a decrease in overall revenues. 2019 had a larger rainfall than 2016, and again we saw a decrease in revenues. So to continue to increase the expenses of the budget for the golf course without a full investigation after what's happening is, in my opinion, will be added to our tax burden at the end of the year when we see a negative number in this column instead of the zero balance. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll call the question. Those in favor? Those opposed? That motion is defeated, and I'll pass the chair back to Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. So with that amendment is defeated, we go back to Councillor Laurie's original motion to reduce it to 2019 levels of 1.9 million. So back to that, any questions, comments before we start? Okay, Councillor Laurie, you get to summarize.
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and I appreciate the dialogue on it, and I do appreciate the amendment that you put forward, even though it was not carried. At this point in time, I'll just simply address a couple of very simple facts. When we look at the golf course, the projected budget for the golf course of $2.1 million, that is actually 5% of our entire overall operating budget for the town of Stony Plain. This is a significant piece of our town, and I think we need to start taking a much closer look at it and ensuring that the golf course works towards achieving a balanced budget. And even though a balanced budget was proposed for 2020, I fear that the continual increase in the budget without seeing an increase in revenues will only lead us to seeing a significantly larger deficit, which will continue to eat away at our annual surpluses, which are already projected to go down. I'd like to acknowledge the fact that the golf course did contribute approximately $1 million worth of revenue to the town, and at that point in time, that was not held in a reserve for the golf course. Therefore, when the new maintenance shack needed to be built, yes, a debenture had to be pulled and is being paid by the golf course, even though those revenues left the golf course. But the reality is that over the last 7 years, the golf course has actually been subsidized $1.7 million from our annual surplus deficit. So I think those numbers have balanced themselves out over the years and might be tipping into the scales of where the town coffers are starting to subsidize the golf course. I acknowledge the fact that the golf course is a wonderful amenity for our community and is a huge aspect of our community that I certainly don't want to see go away. But what I do want to see is I want to see it getting to a balanced budget that is realistic. I think we've seen the fact that there's a significant requirement for increasing green fees and pro shop revenues over actual figures to break even just on this motion itself. The golf course is a huge recreation service within the town, and I'm proud of it, but I like the expectations set forth in other areas of the town. We must be realistic in budgeting and creative in our operations in order to be successful. The unmet revenue cannot continue, plain and simple. And as we move forward, I'd like to see the golf course work to be realistic in those numbers. And ultimately, if the next few years do show a significant increase and a revenue generation, at that point in time, I would be supportive of the golf course coming for an increased budget. Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Thank you for that, and thank you for the dialogue and the conversation. Members of council, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay. Opposed? Okay, and that is carried. With that, we'll call a event recess and we'll adjourn back. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Ben. Good job. Are we live? Okay, thank you very much, and welcome back to council chambers. And continuing on with our corporate plan, we've had a few motions come forward and moving forward, so we'll continue on the conversation discussion. Councillor Bennett.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm referring to page 59 of our corporate plan. It's under the grants,
Okay.
and it's in regard to the Stony Plain Library. I understand that, that the amount that's in our budget for the library is $410,500, and that was because of the 2018 budget, and so we've kept the same, well, actually, it's the 2019 budget, we've kept it the same for 2020. I wonder if council remembers that last year we did have the budget as $410,000, but we also had, the library had a reserve of $57,000. And that was used to offset the ask that the library made at that time. So really, the library had $466,000 in 2019. Then we had our provincial funding budget come through just a few weeks ago. And actually, I'll go back. October 1st, we had the library come and give us a presentation. And at that time, the library board had recommended an ask of $460,000. They were anticipating a 20% cut from the provincial government, and that would have been from, that would have affected the town's budget, and it would have also affected the library, the Parkland Library funding. So lo and behold, our provincial government came and said that they would not cut the libraries. It was such an essential service that, that they kept the funding at the 2019-2018 level, actually. So our library board has not had a chance to meet to discuss the implications of what that meant. But I've been emailing back and forth with our executive director, and she feels that the library board would be amicable to reducing the ask of $460,000 to $435,000. But according to our budget, that's still a discrepancy of $25,000. And so, Mr. Mayor, I would like to make a motion that $25,000 be added to the Stony Plain Library budget.
Okay.
That would be an increase of, I believe it's 0.7.
Okay, so the motion from Councillor Bennett is to increase the library funding by $25,000.
That's right. And that is a 0.14% increase to the corporate budget.
Okay.
$435,000 would be the total ask. It's an increase of $25,000.
Which is a 0.14, is that what you said? 0.14?
Yeah, it's 0.147%
0.14.
in tax increase. Okay, thank you. And do you need to speak more than what you already said within preamble?
Only if I get an argument from someone else.
You always get the opportunity to close, so that's not a problem. Members of council, the motion is on the floor and accepted, and is by Councillor Bennett, and is to increase the Stony Plain Public Library funding by $25,000. Okay, the floor is open. Questions, comments, debate. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick general comment. I just wanted to say thank you very much to Councillor Bennett for bringing this motion forward and for communicating with the library board in which you sit on to come up with what I feel is a very amicable solution. The actual reduction from last year was $37,000. So based on some of the changes that we see, the fact that this ask is only at $25,000, I think is very prudent of both the library and you for this request. So appreciate that coming forward, and I will have absolutely no problem supporting this.
Good. Okay, any other questions? Comments? Okay, thank you. I will speak in favor of the motion as well. If I recall from last budget meeting, I was the one that pressed the issue for the Stony Plain Library to use their reserves, and that was been done, and I don't see a problem with increasing it to half of what they requested last year. Okay, you want to summarize?
Just, Mr. Mayor, just the fact that the library board needs to be commended on their hard work. When we looked at this budget in the summer, in June, it was considerably more. I've heard a lot of phrases like tightening the belt in relationship to many categories when it comes to the provincial budget and to our particular budget. I don't think you'll see any organization that has a tighter belt than our Stony Plain Library for the services that they deliver. And Mr. Mayor, I very much appreciate your support in this motion.
Thank you. I'll call the motion. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, and that is carried. Let's go. My turn. Councillor Bletchfield, Deputy Mayor, you have the chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. Go ahead.
I shouldn't have been so fast. I was chewing my gummy bear.
Shouldn't pass it so fast then.
I ask council to turn to page, what do I have written here? 24, I believe. Okay, so my motion is to reduce council expenses by 5% in the tune of $28,871.65.
Page 24.
So $27,871.65, which equates to 5% of the overall budget for this area.
We're going to see that up on the... Can I have that up on the screen? You'd like to speak to that?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I make this motion as we've seen through this corporate plan. We've asked administration to look at their budgets and their direct reports to see where they can fine tune, sharpen the pencils to reduce the cost on our taxpayers. The only line item that administration does never ever touch is council policy and procedures, and one of them is the expenses that we spend for our operations and what we do. So we've asked staff to tighten their belts a little bit and go through their expenditures with a fine-tooth comb. I'm asking administration to do that for us as well. With a 5% reduction of $27,000 in change, administration will have to go through and see where those savings can come from over the next 12 months.
Anybody else from council like to speak to that? Councillor Matties?
I have a question for administration. With regards to administration, I do remember reading that the #1 priority is education for your staff to make sure that they continue to grow and to be able to, carry out their responsibilities. Can you tell me, so based on these expenditures, which would be education for us as well as, is that correct, that we're referring to here? And also our expenses for attending meetings and things like that. So can you tell me what exactly would be done on the administration side that's related to that with regards to reduction in education and attendance at what you see as important contributions to the work that you do?
Your worship, Councillor Mize wasn't able to hear the entirety of there.
I'm very sorry.
We
So,
have just a quick
sorry about that.
clarification, yeah.
So basically, question is related to, I've read in the report about education being a very high priority for you and administration to make sure that your staff are well-trained to work and do what they are required to do, as well as, I'm sure, whether that's attending economic development or cultural or things like that. So are you cutting in those areas?
On the administrative side, I believe we took a good look. We made some, reductions on some of our training budgets or conference budgets, but I wouldn't go so far as to say it was extensive. I guess the word we try to do is we took a good look. We removed some stuff that we thought maybe could be removed without being, detrimental to the training and the development of staff. If that helps clarify. I can't give you the numbers, so to speak, across the board.
I too believe in the value of education and ensuring that council is up to speed with regards to the responsibilities that we carry out as well. So I'm not supportive of this.
Thank you, Councillor Matties. Anybody else from council like to speak to that? See, Councillor Bennett.
Just for clarification, you're much better in the numbers part than I am, Mr. Mayor. So the total expenses for our budget is $557,433.
That's correct.
And so you're saying that this 5% would decrease it by 27,871.
That's correct.
So what would the total be then?
$529,561.35.
Mr. Mayor, could I make a friendly amendment that we keep the expense at the 2019 budget level instead of reducing the 2019 budget by another $10,000?
So we're reducing it by
17,000.
559.
Yeah.
I think we've done pretty well, Mr. Mayor, in this past year of being able to take some courses and do our education and go to the conferences without exceeding that budget level. And so that's why I'm thinking if we just maintain what we had in 2019.
What does that, how does that impact the tax rate? 10,000 is 0.01.
Sorry, Your Worship, what number are we asking for?
10,000, what does that equate to a tax rate?
0.06%.
0.06. Okay. Can I speak?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Councillor Bennett, I will accept it as a friendly to reduce it to the 2019 levels. Both.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Councillor Loy?
Yes, thank you, Deputy Mayor. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Yeah. Pardon me, I just lost my stream. The 539,874 that was 2019 budget, does administration, can administration advise how close we are to spending that, or how, at the current ratio then, will we exceed that, or not exceed it but meet it, or maybe how much less? I didn't rephrase that properly, and if you understand my question.
Okay, so what is the year-to-date expenditure on
thank
council
you.
expenses?
Your worship, through to Councillor Loy, as of October 30th, the year-to-date expenses was 412,290.
Maybe for further clarification, Your Worship, and I won't quote the exact numbers, but typically this area of council will be fairly close to the budget amounts. Majority of it is salary and expenses, which are, salaries are usually pretty close to budget. The expenses usually pretty close to budget. It also includes, AMA conference, FCM conference, so on and so forth. And, typically we're pretty accurate at estimating those costs, whether it's hotel costs and registrations and so on and so forth. So without knowing the exact numbers, it's usually pretty close to within 90% of the expected budget.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I would support this new motion, and just with the caution that expenses do keep coming up every year. All our conferences, our travel expenses, meals. We do not have a hospitality thing, so the general public knows it. It's just getting back and forth and registering, so it'll make things just a slight tighter, but I think we can live within that easily.
Thank you. Any other further discussion with council? Having seen none, would you like to close?
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Just want to ask council to support the motion. It is, again, a time of financial tightening. We've asked staff to do, looking through their budgets, and I would ask council to do the same thing.
I call the question. All those in favor? Carried. I'll pass it, Chair.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Moving on, we'll continue. Any other motions set forward? Go ahead, Councillor Meyer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just get everyone to turn to page 39, table 26, the large item waste disposal. What I'm proposing. Can we get your mic on? Sorry, can't hear him. So, sorry, table 26, the large item waste disposal. I'm not sure if this is necessarily need to be made as a motion, but I would maybe get administration to clarify. I am curious if you guys are going to look seriously at the implications and costs around possibly creating some type of registration for citizens that would require help to utilize this service. I'm curious if administration feels like we would need a motion to make sure that happens, or if that's just something that you guys are going to look at anyhow.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Meyer. So it does say in the executive summary that we'll provide further information and receive direction from council in Q1 of next year. So the kind of question you've raised is the kind of thing that we would bring back and have some direction from council on some of the specifics of the program, et cetera, and some of the ideas we have, and come forth with a program that then we could roll out based on a common understanding of what residents would get, how they might register, what the cost might be, or those types of circumstances that we have not worked through the details yet.
Okay, so just to be clear, what I'm hearing is you're going to look at that and it'll come forward and we'll have an opportunity to,
That is correct.
perfect, okay, then forget that.
Thank you, Councilor Meyer. Any other questions, comments, changes to the budget? See none. Deputy Mayor, you have the motion, you have the floor.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Ask Council to turn to page 56. Okay, I'm looking at the, excuse me, the local plan for transit. So my motion is to reduce the local service level as provided in under transit to reduce 25%. So leaving 75% in there.
Technical difficulties? Cut budget? Cut funding?
No, my fingers are sticky for me.
Oh, we'll blame the individual that left them for us at our desk, but we'll thank that individual very much for them. They've been great treats tonight. If I could, anybody at, no, I would need Mayor to speak to that, please.
Yes, do. Thank you very much. 1 second. Okay, thanks. I had that written, but I wasn't there. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. So my motion is to look at transit services. I believe transit is good for community as we continue to move forward and grow our community in terms of economics, bringing people into the community and providing service for residents. Through the tri-regional transit master plan, it calls for a service that loops around Stony Plain and goes into Spruce Grove. I think that is a top-of-line model that for our transit services, especially since we're starting off. I believe it's necessary, but I don't think that that top-of-line model of looping around Stony Plain is required. So I'm reducing the budget by 25%, which will leave 75% in the 2020 budget, 2021 budget, and 2022 budget for us to adequately look at transit and then engage our residents to see what it might be. It might be a 3 or 4 parking rides in Stony Plain that gets us to 2 or 3 places in the city of Spruce Grove to connect with their commuter, etc. I just don't believe that having that full service of looping around the town of Stony Plain is currently warranted this time. We want to just make sure we have baby steps into the transit game to move into it to see how well it's taken up by residents, and then we can always increase it next corporate plan if we see a huge uptake and as we consult with their residents. Maybe it is the full gamut and we need that top line service. But let's get into the game first with this approval at 25% reduction, and then look at increasing it in future years if we require that service for our residents.
Thank you. Councilor Loy?
Deputy Mayor, and from the mover there, clarity, it's a 25% reduction in 2020, 2021, and 2022. It's just not this coming fiscal year.
Yes, it is for all years for local transit, period. Because the numbers that are built into our plan is based on the model that was presented in the tri-regional transit study, which calls for a loop within the town of Stony Plain, 2 buses in a 30-minute schedule, 3 hours in the morning and 3 hours in the evening, which I believe that is the creme of the creme, top-of-line service. We might get there one day, but in today's economic climate and realities, let's take a baby step first and let's get into the market, let's get into the transit game, and then add to that later.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, from the information that I've received so far, I would support that motion. I do agree that we do have to start somewhere with transit, and I've heard all night and all night before, we have to be very careful. We are in tough times. We don't know exactly what we're getting into with everything. Transit does not pay. It is a cost thing to the communities. It'd never be a break even, so I will support that. as you say, Mr. Mayor, we can look at it at every strat meeting and at every spring budget and the next year's thing. So I will be supporting that motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lowy. Councillor Laurie.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I too will be supporting this motion, and I thank the mayor for bringing this forward. I think, as council's familiar with, I've been sitting on the RTSC, and the transit file has been something very important to me, and I can't tell you the amount of numbers and work and figures and routes, et cetera, that are in my head, and I had a very similar thought on a motion this evening. As was mentioned, transit is something that when you break it down, the aspect of it, transit itself, it does not necessarily pay. It's always going to be a subsidized service, but it has many aspects and many benefits for our community in social, economic, growth, retention, inclusivity, environmental, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. But it's very difficult to put numbers on all those and put measurements on all those. So the reality is we know it provides us those benefits, and so we have to weigh as to how that provides it with. One thing, a couple quick things I wanted to highlight. Obviously, like I said, Mayor Choi already hit the service level aspect of it. Starting from step 1 rather than step 5, 6, or 7 is obviously, in my opinion, the right place to start. And so I appreciate him bringing this forward. And I do think we might even be able to see a little bit more synergies. As the mayor mentioned, the current service level, some adjustments there. I think we could potentially see up to 50%, but I agree with the reduction of 25% to give a little bit of flexibility based on the feedback that we received from residents. We also have the consideration of the RTSC coming to us early in 2020, which will be looking at operational in 2022. So this provides us a great opportunity and lead into that. I do appreciate the fact that the General Manager of Corporate Services brought forward the grant that has been, at this point in time, reduced from the government in respect to capital, and the fact that we have also seen an unexpected increase in MSI, which we might be able to offset that. I think it's incredibly important that while we have grant funding that we can apply to capital purchases, we do that. If transit is something that we want to be in, we can look at the procurement of approximately $740,000 worth of assets for a capital cost of less than $200,000. That is a huge, huge benefit to our community, and I think we need to keep that in mind. In addition, we've also heard of potential different grants in respect to the FCM, and Mayor Choi didn't necessarily go into the numbers, but when you look at the reduction that he has proposed and you look into what that will do for us in 2021 with the potential of the grant funding we will receive from FCM, that actually would make a very, very minimal increase in 2021. Which is impressive considering the fact that we are going from 4 months of operations to 12 months of operations. So I think this is very prudent, very responsible, and a very smart way to introduce transit into our community, and I will 100% support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Laurie. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. So I'm looking at page 56. You're not, I'm referring to the chart, and it says local service. And so that's what your motion is indicating. Is that the 173,333? Is that the 25% decrease? Yes. Or is it the total amount of 251,333?
No, thank you, Councilor Bennett. That is for local services, so it's out of the 173.33, which equates to $43,333.25 for this year, and $88,950 for 2021 and 2022.
Could administration give us the tax impact?
0.26 and 0.52.
I'm sorry?
0.26 for this year and 0.52 next year.
So instead of 1.48, it's 0.26?
No, it's 1.22. So it's a reduction of 0.26.
Okay. And administration, how will this affect our public engagement and what the information we want to get from our community as to the needs assessment that they can help us with?
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Bennett. So public engagement was proposed for very early next year. we would like to get out to the public before we purchase the buses for sure, so, or get a direction from council to purchase the buses. So that would go ahead. The 25% reduction would basically be a somewhat slight lesser operating model than was proposed in the corporate plan. It likely is very achievable that we could have a startup service of some kind for that kind of reduction. So, and then we could listen to residents and see if that meets expectations or feedback on that, and report back to council very early in the new year.
Thank you. One more question, if you don't mind. What impact would that have on our regional partners?
Your worship, that would have no impact on our regional partner. The commuter service is fully funded, so that's the most impact on our regional partner, and the local service is totally at our discretion at this time.
Okay, thank you.
Further council discussion? Councillor Matties.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I just have one question with regards to, so I do support the reduction, but just a question with regards to efficiency of the routes. So what my understanding is with Spruce Grove, their bus leaves every 20 minutes to Edmonton, if you could confirm that. And then is there a way that maybe one route could get a bus there within that 20-minute interval so that we could have more efficiency and access to the routes that are going into Edmonton, with looking at a reduction and then maybe having one bus doing that, just a possibility?
Your worship, through you to Councillor Matty, so that would be, I guess we'd have to look at the particular details of the connections, et cetera. High-level planning has been done based on the route that we have in the corporate plan. We would have to adjust the route to make it shorter, to lower the costs, or have somewhat lesser service, 25% lesser service, local service. So how that would connect to routes in Spruce Grove, whatever I could not speculate on tonight. But in general, I think the transportation planning for transit would. There may be some waiting in Spruce Grove for the next bus to come along, and I can't speculate right now, but we would do our best to try to work with Spruce Grove on those details.
Just a quick follow-up.
Oh, go ahead.
The reason that I'm asking that is just, because we have the train, and, as the bus is going through and stuff and being impacted by that, if there was a possibility with a reduced budget, if there was a possibility. If there was a possibility that we would be able to have maybe a shorter route that could get people there efficiently, just as a way to accommodate that reduction.
So I'll answer that, because right now, the full service level has not yet been defined, and that will be determined as the administration goes out to the public to see where the best locations are, maybe for a park ride, maybe for a transit loop, and that can be discussed at that time. This is to get us into the transit level services without increasing to the top tier of the service level.
That's fine, thanks.
Any further council discussion? I just make a comment at this time. I'm very proud to hear what I'm hearing around this table regarding transit. As you all well know, that I could not support a transit system that run completely through our town at this time. I think it's prudent that we have a transit system that comes to our town, and I think this gives us the opportunity to start within it to see if there is a true need for it in our community, and it also is a minimal impact to our residents, so that if it is something that we need, we can increase it, and if it's something that we do not need, we can always get rid of it, and it's not a lot of cost to anyone. So I'm very supportive of what you brought forward tonight, Mayor, and I look forward to administration coming to us with a starter route that looks something that will get our residents from our community to the opposing community, and hopefully it's on the other side of the train tracks, so that it's goes to Councillor Matty's comments about being able to get there on a timely manner. So I think that's two things that are really key within this, is to be able to deliver a quality service that gets people to the adjoining service in our community, our following communities, so that people can get around a lot better. And it does put us economically in a much better position to move our communities forward. So thank you for that. Mayor, if I could get you to close.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I think we don't really need to close. I think the comments around the table from our fellow colleagues speak volumes of what we believe in, as we believe in transit. We wanted to come to see her in the community. We just wanted to make sure that we're prudent about it and make sure that we do the proper steps instead of looking at a full-blown service right now. My only question for you is, the chair, is do we need to signify the dollar amount with that percentage as well? So let's add the dollar amount of $43,333.25 for 2020. Right, and then that the subsequent years are reduced 25% as well. Okay.
You'll need the subsequent years in there as well.
Okay.
I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Carried.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. I take the chair, and then moving on to that corporate services. What page am I on? Oh. Okay. Continue on. Any other motions, comments to make? Councillor Laurie, please.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I'll refer to page 62 of our corporate planning document. And I will be making a motion to move up the initiative on the Public Works building to the years 2021 and 2022.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Understanding that we're sitting here tonight approving the 2020 corporate plan, I struggled as to whether to bring this initiative forward. However, I did think it was incredibly important. Previously, this initiative was in our corporate plan in these years. Over the past year, we've had several updates from our general manager and from our Public Works department on the current conditions in our Public Works. We've also had a tour. That tour left me with a stark reality that the facility is simply unacceptable for the staff that we expect to work out of there. When I look at the working conditions of various members of our staff throughout the town, I find that almost all are what I would consider almost premium. We have a very nice town office. We have a very nice golf course maintenance shack. We have a very nice pavilion, and so on and so forth. But the reality is, Public Works, because it is not necessarily a customer-facing building for our residents, has continued to be overlooked time and time again. Understanding we have some dollars that have been allocated in the 2019 corporate plan, and we are to receive a report in the spring of 2020 on some potential options for the Public Works building, I feel it would be amiss for us to have this initiative pushed out to 2023 and 2024. As I mentioned, we are not approving anything for 2021 and 2022. Therefore, these essentially are place markers in the budget to ensure that we recognize this project as a priority project for our staff. I think it's incredibly important that we consider the fact that I believe the numbers were there were over 60 workers who shared one bathroom, and it was not a very nice bathroom in that facility. There are no adequate change facilities within that building. The lockers for the employees are in truck bays that are often filled with various types of equipment, which exposes their personal effects and the employees to the various elements that those pieces of equipment put off. I do understand the need for us to continue to be financially prudent, and part of my justification in bringing this project forward is I do feel that we will see a delay in our recreation center complex. And I think it's important we keep both of these initiatives in line in the plan. Therefore, if we are unable to move forward with the recreation complex in 2020 and 2021, as it is identified in our budget, but identified further in our partners' budgets, that there is maybe a potential that we could move a Public Works facility forward sooner rather than later and put this initiative ahead of the recreation center. That's what I have to open, Your Worship, and I'll open that up to comments from council. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the motion is to move the initiative of the Public Works Building to the 2021 to 2022 year. Thank you. And then open the floor for members of council for questions and debate. Councilor Pletchko, Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I too can support this, as I spoke to it last night in regards to this. I do appreciate Councilor Laurie bringing this forward tonight. I think it's very important that we keep things that are on council's budget moving forward, even if it's something that we have to delay. So I think it's very important that we continue to look at all aspects of what it is that the town needs and have a full view of that. I would suggest that as we move forward, that we look at all aspects of what is needed within the community, from our employees through to our services that we can provide back to our community and our residents. So tonight I will be supporting that. Thank you.
Good. Any other comments? Go ahead, Councilor Meyer.
So I won't be supporting this for two reasons. I think, one, we shouldn't take our eye off the ball. We are, as Councillor Judy had mentioned earlier, we have a vision and we are moving towards that. But I would also caution, while I appreciate all the comments regarding the staff and the facilities that they are using, at this current time, it's more important that we think about what is going to build our town in terms of economics or economic growth. So like I say, I understand, yes, the staff facilities there are not exactly up to par. If we build a public works building as opposed to, say, a rec facility, that is not going to be the economic driver that the rec facility would be. So like I say, I don't want us to take our eye off the ball. I will not be supporting this.
Councilor Loy. Go ahead, Loy. Councilor Loy.
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, this is just moving it up. There's no commitment to it. I don't think we're dropping the ball on anything. It's now there's going to be two major items on there. Yes, those are the choices that we'll make when it comes time. Our people deserve good accommodations. I worked in the building here, and it was 30 years, and we had one washroom. It wasn't very pleasant. And this is not a commitment. It's just, it's no different than the provincial budget. It keeps it in the 3-year cycle, and that's all we're doing. So I will be supporting it.
Okay. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just need clarification. We're not doing a either or in this motion. We are just moving it up to look at some of the possibilities.
That would be correct. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. Councillor Matties.
Your Worship, a question with regards to, for example, like moving this from the 2023, where it is right now, and bringing it back to 2021 versus having the opportunity to build our reserves so that specifically for public works, so that when 2023 comes that we would have funding support and that an acknowledgement that this will be done. I too am concerned, as Councillor Meyer presented, that if we bring things forward, that it's important to focus on the rec complex and those types of things. And so I'm wondering if putting in a reserve would provide the same purpose that would keep us in track with that. And if I'm asking the administration.
Your Worship, just maybe generally speaking too. So certainly there's two options. You can either put money into reserves for, a set amount of time, build that amount up, and then use that when you either do the capital construction or, in the past, we'll use those reserves that are created to pay debenture payments down the road. Alternatively to that, the other notion is to, just simply prepare for the tax rate increase and to go with the debenture payment the year of or the year after construction, you usually start paying for it. So, you know, the town in the past has used both of those approaches. The challenge when you get into the large amounts, you know, I mean, the 10 million or the $15 million builds, you know, it's a significant amount you'd have to be setting into reserves on an annual basis to build it up to a point where you could, you know, put a good dent in the capital project. I'll leave it at that, Your Worship. I'm not sure if that answers the question. It's just some general comment on, you know, putting it aside in advance or paying for it after. It's at the end, you know, I mean, it affects the tax rate either earlier as a reserve transfer or down the road as a debenture payment. And there's more to it than that, but that's sort of a quick overview of it.
If I could just follow up with that. So bottom line, my concern is that if, for example, we bring this back to 2021, 2022, and then we're not able to do it because it becomes not a priority, then there's still no funding that has been set aside for this initiative. And I would like to see that we are putting funding away specifically for this. And even if that is to pay for part of the debenture payment, at least the intent is there to get this done. I'd appreciate feedback from any of my colleagues on that.
I'll leave it up to them to comment. Councillor Bennett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had one more question. When I look at page, and I'm sorry, I'm not commenting on what you said, because, yeah. Page 62, where it says PW building design was $115,000 in 2019. Did that happen? I don't remember seeing a report on that. But that would give us some idea of the kind of building we're looking at, is what I'm thinking.
Your Worship, through you to Councillor Bennett, that project has not happened yet. We did form an internal committee this year that was working through some options and challenges, trying to understand some potential solutions. We are in the process of going out to get some expert advice on buildings and costs and those types of things and options, et cetera. So the money that you see here is part of that expert advice that we intend to look at to come back to council early next year with a needs assessment and a more detailed, rigorous analysis of the options and costs, which would then be ready to go into detailed design and construction, and based on the timing that council decides either tonight or in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
I just have one more.
Go ahead, Councillor Matty.
So my question is, when you're talking about a $10 million initiative that we're looking at bringing back to 2021, we're also talking about having a recreation complex built then. I mean, is this like, are we thinking we can do this all? Is that what we're referring to? Or just putting it back in here? Because, so then it'll end up being done 2023, 2024, 2025 anyway. It's just to keep it in the books? Is that all we're doing?
I think that was the intent from Councillor Laurie. Yes?
Your Worship, my intent behind this is to continue to recognize the fact that this is a priority of council, that it was identified and it was in our 2019 corporate plan with a $115,000 expenditure to give us the Public Works facility design and report on information, which we just heard from the General Manager of Planning and Infrastructure will be coming to us in early 2020. And the capital expenditure for this was already in our corporate plan for 2021, which yes, sits at $9.6 million. But I think, as we've heard already from the General Manager, the information that will come back to us will show us what that will look like, whether that can be staged, whether it's something that is or is not attainable in the near foreseeable future. What I'm not comfortable with is the fact that we have taken an initiative that was in our plan from 2019 to 2021 and pushed it back to 2023 and 2024. We've also, and Councillor Matty's noted, she's asking about $9.6 million in 2021. What I'm asking for is the amount in 2023, which is identified at $480,000, be moved to 2021, and the amount of $9.6 million moved to 2022. But as we've already seen with our $87 million recreation facility, those amounts are subject to change. That $87 million now appears as $30 million in our corporate plan. We will not know the information as to what this looks like until the general manager brings us back this report. What I am identifying is that when we receive our corporate plan next year and when we go to a strategic planning this coming year, I would like this priority to remain in the place that it was in our previous corporate plan so we can continue to discuss and determine whether it should or should not stay in that location. I feel the decision by administration to push it out to 2023, 2024 does not necessarily align with the priorities of council.
Any questions, comments? Okay. I appreciate where you're coming from, Councillor Laurie. I will not be supporting the motion. Looking at the fact that even though we're just only approving the 2020 year in this corporate plan, we also have to project numbers for 2021 and 2022. By adding the $450,000 to 2022, I'm not too worried about because that's a slight increase, but that $9.6 million added to 2022, what does that make our tax increase proposed for 2022 look like in this corporate plan?
Your Worship, I could provide that on the $11 million debenture for the rec center, it was about just over a 2% increase over 2 years. So it would be slightly less than that.
So slightly less than 2%. So on the corporate plan, what is the 2022 tax increase proposed to be at? We used to have those numbers on the spreadsheet here.
Your Worship, it was at 4.01 with the reduction of local transit. It is at 3.47 currently. So you are at just over 5% with that addition.
Over 5% that addition. Okay, for the proposed 22.
And that would be half of the debenture. There'd be an additional increase required in the following year as well.
Right, which would be another increase of 2 point.
Approximately 2%.
Okay. So with that, Councillor Laurie, I will not support the motion. I think your idea was just to make sure that this is in Council's preview and to let staff know that we are thinking about that, and 100% we are. If you look at the 2020 planning infrastructure, what's this here? It says under one of the key projects and service deliveries for planning infrastructure is a public works building needs assessment and options. So what does that mean to you? That means that public works will go out and figure out what the needs are and bring back options to council. To me, that means council is fully aware, and so is the staff, that we're looking at this. So moving the capital plan, which changes the number, because the fiscal plan, even though we're approving 2020 only, and in principle 21, 22, it does impact the numbers that we see. So I think the administration has done a good job of planning the numbers fiscally, so we're responsible, we're not taking increases where we don't need to. And looking at the sheet that was provided by administration earlier this afternoon when I asked for when debenture payments come due. So in 2022 comes due of 1.31% of $220,084, which would help us if we pull the trigger on a recreation facility to pay that debenture payment on that. And also in 2023, another $35,000 comes off the debenture, which is another tax savings of 0.21%, which we can earmark for there. And then in 2024, what this is scheduled for is another payment that comes out, which is $129,000, which would easily, of a 0.76%, fund the $480,000 for the initial phases of a public works building if council decides to choose to pull the trigger after we get the report from the administration in Q2. And after that, 2026 is the $181,000 getting removed from our debenture payments, which then is a full 1% at that time, 1.07%, which will help us fund the $9.6 million that's earmarked to do that. So there is a fiscal plan put in place by administration, and to pull that forward just so that council has their eyes on it is a good concept, but we already have it our eyes on it with the service plan and the key projects that is being delivered by planning infrastructure of a public works building assessment needs and options that'll be brought back to council. Go ahead, Councilor Lord, you can close.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. I appreciate all the comments from my councillors. As we mentioned, this is something that definitely, I think, can be discussed in the strat plan, and we will see a report for information. That report that will come back to us for information, which is already approved, will give us an understanding of our current, future needs, etc. We've already heard tonight on the rec center about the different reports that we will see back and how that will play in. This report will look at the location, the size, the capacity, etc. But one key piece that everybody seems to be remiss on, it will also talk about potential staging. We are throwing around a number of $9.6 million, like that is exactly what we will see. And in reality, the overall public works facility redesign and rebuild may be $9.6 million, but that does not mean that that $9.6 million must be spent in 2022. What I am simply saying is that I would like us to recognize a capital issue earlier in our corporate plan that shows a priority to an issue that has been identified to council as needing immediate attention. The conditions that our employees are expected to work in are dismal, and I am disappointed to hear that I have 3 members of council right now who don't seem to recognize that as a priority, and that their vision for the town of Stony Plain and our growth does not include that of the satisfaction of our staff. The reality is that the people who take care of our town are the people who make this town. And it's our responsibility to take care of the people who take care of this town. Because the more we take care of them, the more pride they will hold in the town, and the more belief they will have that this organization truly respects the work that they put in and appreciates it. Expecting these employees to continue to work in these conditions for another 4 to 5 years is not acceptable in my books. And I am not asking council to fund anything today. I am asking council to make a realization that this is a priority. And as we go further into strat planning, I think this conversation will rear its head again, and I highly anticipate that it will be recognized as a priority. I am asking council to put this initiative back into the place it was in the original plan. Mr. Mayor, you brought up a very important point that I'm very glad you raised in respect to projected tax increases for future years, because do you remember what the 2020 projected increase for 2019 was? My English is going crazy now that we're getting a little later.
It is late.
We were projecting 8.56% for the 2020 corporate plan. Is that where we are today? Is that what we're looking at today? No. It's significantly less. I believe we started the evening at 5.24%, and even though I don't see it on display right now, I believe we've actually come down from that 5.24% while still realizing new services that benefit our community. Our projected tax increase right now for 2021, as of last corporate plan, was 5.59%. Which is higher than what I just heard the General Manager of Corporate Services say that the projected tax increase for 2021 with this initiative in place would be. So as we see, we are only approving the current year. But what we put in the future years is incredibly important. If we had deferred transit out for 5 years, would we have approved transit this year? You talked tonight about deferring the rec center. If we deferred the rec center, that puts it at risk. So again, are we going to defer this project to put it at risk? Or are we going to keep this initiative in the place where we had it in our corporate plan last year, based on our strategic planning and priorities that we all agreed to last January, and continue the conversation moving forward, continue to receive the information and reports from the General Manager, and continue to look at what we can do in the short-term future? Thank you for the opportunity to close, Your Worship.
Thank you. Members of Council, thank you for the conversation and the debate. And then with that, I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay. Opposed? Okay, and that's carried. Thank you, Members of Council. It's close to 10 o'clock. I said that we'll try to end here. Just a quick check. Do we have many more motions to go? Do we have to come back for another night, or can we finish up? I have a few more that I might need to make. They're quick and easy, hopefully. Councilor Lord, do you have any?
I believe I have one that I don't think will be quick.
Okay, Councilor Meyer. Counselor Loy. Counselor Matties. Counselor Bennett. Counselor Pletchko. Okay, so Counselor Laurie, just you and I have motions to make, so we will recess now and we'll come back tomorrow at 6 o'clock. I would too, but,
Away.
but we, we're, but we